Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another scary story. Your place where we uncover the darkest mysteries in a calming and reflective way. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes. Relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. Now get comfortable and relax. I remember the moment my dad first pulled me onto the Black Ridge Heights site like it was yesterday, with the late afternoon sun bouncing off steel girders and fresh poured concrete smelling of promise and sweat. I was 17, lanky with more curiosity than caution. Dad, Frank Reeves, had been a foreman for 30 years, and when he told me to come on down and learn the ropes, I figured I was signing up for an easy summer job. Lock up tools, sweep floors, maybe grab coffee when the drill guys needed a break. But the instant I stepped inside that skeletal tower, something prickled at the back of my neck, like static, faint as a whisper. The place felt half-finished in more ways than one. Rebar, jutting through slabs, electrical boxes dangling from unfinished walls, cob dust layering every surface. And the elevator, caged in temporary plywood walls, wires looping out of its shaft, somehow still worked. Dad wasn't blind to the oddities. He'd shake his head when I mentioned hearing soft footsteps echoing down the hollow corridors or when the elevators chimed at midnight with no one inside. He chalked it up to creaky joints and an old building settling. Concrete shrinks and groans, he'd say, flicking ash from his cigarette. Not ghosts, kid. That summer, I learned how to read blueprints and swing a sledgehammer. But the real lessons came when the sky had turned black. I'd be doing my rounds with only a mag light and the hum of the generator for company, when the elevator lights would blink on, low and pulsing, despite no call buttons being pressed. I'd shine my beam inside and catch a glimpse of a wheelchair, parked dead center, its wheels smeared with fresh mud. No one ever sat in it, but I could almost feel its pressure in the steel grid beneath my boots. Dad finally broke his silence one night as we secured the gate. He spat tobacco and said, "When they dug this foundation, they didn't just find dirt. They found bones. An old asylum patient buried standing up, right where that elevator shaft is." His voice dropped to a rasp, like he'd swallowed gravel. I stared at the lift's plywood door, suddenly imagining it opening into soil and shadows. That was the first time I realized Black Ridge Heights didn't just tower over the abandoned mills of Harper's district. It sat atop their graves, and I was about to learn just how restless the dead could be. That evening, the sun dipped behind the skeletal frame of Black Ridge Heights and the world turned ink black almost instantly. Dad had gone home early. His back was barking from 10 hours of hauling rebar, and I was left alone to sweep up sawdust and secure the building's perimeter. My mag light cut a cone of brightness through the lobby's shadows, illuminating drooping wires and half-installed drywall. Every time I blinked, I thought I saw movement at the edges of the beam, a flicker of white, a hint of a shawl. I told myself it was an owl or a stray piece of plastic caught in the ventilation. I finished locking an exterior door and walked toward the elevator bank, my boots drumming on the concrete floor. The elevator shouldn't run after hours. Dad made that clear, yet above me one of the cars chimed its arrival. My throat clenched. I wasn't expecting anyone, living or dead. Still, I pressed the call button. The doors slid open with a pneumatic sigh. Inside sat that wheelchair again, its steel frame rattling slightly as if settling into fresh soil. Mud crusted its wheels, dark and damp. I swallowed, my heart drumming against my ribs. In the pale floodlight of my torch, I saw deep grooves gouged in the concrete, narrow tracks leading straight into the car, but none leading out. "I don't know what you want," I said, voice louder than I intended. The air smelled of earth and old fabric. You could taste decay on your tongue. I raised a hand, fingers trembling, to brush at the seat cushion, but before I touched it, the lights winked out. Total darkness. My flashlight flickered and died. My breath came in great gasps, and I could feel the elevator beginning to move. Downward. A cold draft swirled around me like someone walking past on the other side of the closed doors. Then, muffled against steel, I heard a rasp. Basement. I bashed at the call button, but the cab rattled and plunged faster. The panel glow under the emergency light showed the basement arrow illuminated, mocking me. It shouldn't be there. Panic seized me. As I heard the doors start to slide open below, the car jerked to a halt. The doors parted onto absolute blackness. No floor, no walls, just yawning void. I peered over the edge of the platform, stomach dropping. A fetid wind gusted up from the darkness, carrying the distant echo of children crying, a metal wheelchair, creaking on unseen rails. I bolted from the car, lunging forward until my feet hit empty air. I stumbled backward, slamming the doors shut and slapping at the offline call button until sparks showered my palms. The light snapped back on. The elevator was empty, and back at the lobby level. I leaned against the cold wall, shaking. My pulse thundered in my ears. Whatever this place was building, it wasn't condos. It was a trap, and I'd just found the bottom. I didn't sleep that night. Even though I staggered home at dawn, the cold steel walls of that phantom basement clung to my skin, and every shadow in my cramped apartment felt like it might reach out and snatch me. By noon, I'd chugged 3 coffees and was already back at site, against Dad's orders, but I needed answers. The lobby was quiet under the whistle of wind through unfinished window frames. I shoved aside caution and ducked beneath the caution tape to the elevator bank. The plywood enclosure looked more haphazard than ever, as though someone, or something, had splintered it from the inside. I knelt to trace the gouged tracks with my gloved finger. They started at the threshold, sliced into the shaft, then disappeared. There was no exit on the lobby floor, only a sealed concrete wall. Whoever carved those lines, human or not, had tunneled into something solid. Hard hammering, I climbed into the car and shut the doors. I tapped the button for the supposed basement, bracing myself. This time there was no sudden free fall. Instead, the doors slid open right there, onto the lobby again. The hallway was unchanged, emptier than ever. I stepped out, flashlight sweeping, but nothing stirred. No wheelchair, no ratcheting wheels, just my jittery breath and distant rumble of traffic. I ran my hand along the wall until I found the service panel, one of the few spots Dad said wasn't locked down yet. Behind it lay the elevator's control module, a mess of wires and circuit boards, some charred, some soaked with panting condensation. I snapped a photo and texted it to Dad. Can someone please tell me why these wires look burned and wet? And why is there earth debris inside the shaft? He called immediately. I waited by the panel, sweat cooling on my brow. Don't touch anything, he barked. His voice was tight, nearly a whisper, an oddity coming from the man who'd weathered hurricanes. Meet me at the office in 10 minutes. I emerged into the lobby to find him waiting, cigarettes dangling from his lips. He tucked his thumb into his belt and stared up at the metal skeleton. Harper's Mill Asylum kept records down the hall, he said, voice rough. I'm pulling them. We need a professional, an archaeologist or historical society, and maybe a priest. Hell, I don't care. But you're not riding that elevator again. I nodded, but my gut told me this wasn't just about safety regulations or insurance liabilities. Something in Dad's eyes hinted he'd felt that draft, heard those cries. We'd disturbed more than concrete and rebar when we broke ground. We'd torn open a wound in history, and the dead wanted it sewn shut again. As we locked up for the day, the elevator chimed one last time. We both froze. The doors slid open, empty, but the hallway lights flickered in a slow, pulsing rhythm, as if inviting us back downstairs. I swallowed hard, realizing the real descent was only just beginning. Friday night, and the site was officially closed for inspections. Dad and I met with Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a local archaeologist from the State Historical Society. She carried a battered briefcase full of yellowing folders and craned her neck at the half-built lobby like a somber tour guide. Her assistant, a lanky grad student, flashed a headlamp over the elevator shaft while Dr. Marsh consulted the asylum's ledger. They admitted Helen Arbuckle on April 3, 1951, Dr. Marsh announced, voice echoing off bare concrete. She tapped a brittle page. She was paralyzed from meningitis. When the asylum closed in 1954, many patients disappeared from the rolls. It's likely she died here, unrecorded, and they buried her upright because they were short on coffin space. Dad ran a hand through his thinning hair. So the rumor was true. Dr. Marsh studied the elevator opening. The foundation crew must have disturbed her burial pit. The earth shifted and something, perhaps her wheelchair, ended up in the fall shaft. But that doesn't explain the moving tracks or those sounds. We followed her assistant down the service staircase to the basement level, technically the first underground parking deck, but he led us to a steel hatch hidden behind plywood. My flashlight caught the jagged outline of the hole. It wasn't on any blueprint. Dr. Marsh shone her light in. The shaft descended into raw earth, carved steps leading into soft dirt, a narrow tunnel burrowing beneath the slab. She bent to study scratch marks on the concrete lip. "This was opened recently," she murmured. Dad's face went white. "I didn't authorize any digging." We climbed back up. Above us, the elevator chimed as if it had heard our conversation. The doors slid open to reveal empty darkness. Dr. Marsh cleared her throat. "If we're to respect these remains, we need to disinter properly, document everything, and re-enter respectfully. Otherwise..." She let the sentence hang. That night, I lay in bed but couldn't still my racing mind. Was I appeasing a restless asylum patient or opening a gate for something worse? At 3:03 a.m. my phone buzzed, a notification from the security camera app. I squinted at the screen. The lobby cam showed the elevator sliding open by itself. No interior lights, no wheelchair, just a yawning void. Then a gray shape materialized, a hunched figure in a ragged shawl pushing an empty wheelchair. Her head lifted and the camera feed went static. I bolted upright. My skin crawled. The asylum records had her photo, sunken cheeks, milky eyes. I stared at the app, heart pounding, and realized the next move was mine. If Dr. Marsh was right, only a proper burial would calm whatever haunted this place. But to grant Helen that peace, I'd have to venture below again, down into the darkness, where the walls we'd built meant nothing, and the dead still roamed free. The following morning, Dad, Dr. Marsh, and I met with the county coroner and a small crew of preservationists. They brought delicate trowels, polyethylene bags, and foam-lined boxes, tools more suited to an archaeological dig than a condo foundation. I watched the crew gently peel back concrete fragments around Helen Arbuckle's original burial site, revealing the lower half of a rusted wheelchair wheel and a tangle of orthopedic restraints. Beneath, the earth was damp and dark, as though soaked through with decades of grief. As they worked, Dr. Marsh murmured prayers in a clear, steady voice. "Standard procedure for respectful reinterment," she said. I could still hear the phantom echo of my own whispered apology from the night before. "I'm sorry, Helen. We didn't know." Nearby, Dad stood silent, jaw set, wringing his hard-worn gloves in his hands. By midday, the team had recovered a small femur fragment and a length of iron rod that must once have supported her frame. They wrapped each piece in archival tissue, then placed everything in a wooden casket-sized box inscribed simply, "Helen Arbuckle, 1923-1954. The box was shrouded in a linen pall and carried, like a queen, into the lobby. We formed a loose procession toward the elevator bank. The plywood enclosure had been removed entirely, its remains tossed aside. Dad and I exchanged a cautious glance. For the first time, the shaft looked ordinary, tame. Dr. Marsh pressed the call button. The elevator dinged and the doors glided, open on perfect hydraulics. Inside, the car was spotless, no mud-streaked wheels, no gouged tracks. Together, we loaded the box onto the elevator floor. I felt the steel under my palm warm almost imperceptibly, as though welcoming a sleeping guest. Dr. Marsh tapped the basement button, now simply labeled B1. The car slid downward smoothly, carrying Helen back to the earth from which she'd been torn. When the doors opened, pale sunlight filtered in through a barred window at the far end of the parking deck. The coroner and crew laid the box into a freshly dug niche lined with undisturbed soil. Dr. Marsh sprinkled handfuls of scented pine shavings over the casket before the lid was secured. Even the air smelled cleaner, an odd sweetness replacing that damp rot. We rode the elevator back up in silence. At the lobby level, the car chimed one final time as the doors opened. There, in the corner, stood an empty wheelchair, gleaming steel, immaculate. I approached slowly, heart thudding, and reached out to touch its painted armrest. The metal felt cool and real. Then the doors closed on their own, sealing the car. When they reopened a moment later, the wheelchair was gone. I breathed in, exhaled, and realized the hush around Black Ridge Heights had never sounded sweeter. The building was still unfinished, its skeleton still bare, but the tremors of the past had finally stilled. And for the first time, I believed the dead could rest. Hollowbrook was never supposed to be more than a memory for me. That's how I had left it, packed up and shoved into the back of my mind when I moved to the city all those years ago. The mountains, the trees, the town that felt like it was suspended in time. It was supposed to stay behind me like a shadow that fades with the sunrise, but you don't get to choose when the past comes back to find you. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when I got the call. The voice on the other end of the line was crisp, impersonal, too impersonal for the news it was delivering. It was a woman's voice, and she sounded like she was reading off a script. "Maggie Harper?" she asked, though I didn't need to answer. "I'm sorry to inform you that your mother, Grace Harper, passed away last night. She passed peacefully in her sleep." I was silent. I had no words. None. I hadn't spoken to my mother in nearly 3 years. Not since I packed my things and left Hollowbrook without a second glance. And now I was standing in the middle of my cramped apartment in the city, my fingers frozen around the receiver, as I was told the details of her death. "Arrangements have been made for the funeral. We're sorry for your loss." I wanted to ask her if my mother had ever stopped talking about me, if she ever mentioned that I would come back someday. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't coming home, not after everything that had happened. But those words never came. Instead, I just said, "Thank you," and hung up the phone. The truth is, I'd avoided Hollowbrook for so long because of what happened to my dad. But it was more than that. It was the quiet ache of a town that had never stopped watching me leave. A town that had stayed frozen in place while I tried to outrun it. I didn't even give myself a chance to think it over. The next morning, I booked a flight, packed a bag, and drove out to the airport. Hollowbrook was 3 hours by car, but with all the miles between me and that place, I could have sworn it was still just a bad memory. But I knew the moment I stepped off that plane, I was going back to the past. I drove through the mountains with the car windows down. The air was thick with that distinct smell of pine and damp earth, something I never realized I'd missed until it smacked me in the face. The fog was settling over the road by the time I reached the outskirts of Hollowbrook. It felt like the town was holding its breath, waiting for me to return. The signs hadn't changed much. "Welcome to Hollowbrook." The green sign still read, hanging crookedly from rusted posts. The weathered paint had long since faded, but the town was still here, and so was I. I drove past the few stores still standing, their neon lights flickering like memories, and the cemetery up on the hill where my father was buried. I didn't even glance over at it. Not yet. The house was just as I remembered. Old, tired, and sagging under the weight of time. My mother had kept it the same way, even after my father went missing. I parked out front, sitting in the car for a moment, staring at the peeling white paint on the porch. The porch swing that used to creak when I sat on it in the summers, before my dad disappeared. I could still hear the sound of his voice in the kitchen, calling me in from the yard to help with something. I could still see the way my mother's eyes would always follow me when I left for school, even after all those years. The front door of the house was locked, of course. But I had a key, and I wasn't even sure why I still had it. I put it in the lock and let myself inside. The place smelled the same, musty, like old books and dried flowers. The air was thick with memories I didn't know I was still holding on to. It felt strange being back here, but not in the way I thought it would. The silence wasn't comforting, it was suffocating. The house felt like it had been waiting for something, waiting for me to come back. My mother's things were still scattered around, the floral cushions on the couch, the curtains she'd hung in the windows to block the morning light, the photo albums stacked on the coffee table untouched. She'd left everything as it was, as if she'd been waiting too, for someone to come back and make it right. I set my bag down on the couch and walked through the rooms. My feet creaked on the floorboards, and the walls groaned with the sounds of age. Every room held something of her, something of me, but the house felt empty, hollow even. It didn't take long for the first memory to hit me. It was like a sudden wave, sharp, heavy, and cold. I saw my dad's face as clearly as if he were standing in front of me, the way he used to laugh and slap his knee when he was telling one of his stories. I remembered the way his hand used to rest on my shoulder whenever he spoke to me, like he was trying to protect me from something. I didn't understand it then. I couldn't. I shook my head, pushing the thoughts away. This wasn't the time for memories. I walked to the back of the house where the door to the garden stood. It was still locked, but I had a key for that too. The garden was where it had all started, the place where my father had disappeared, the place where I had first heard the whispers. I stepped outside, and as the door creaked shut behind me, I heard it, that same eerie sound, the whisper of the wind between the trees, the same feeling I'd had all those years ago. Something was waiting. The garden was a place I had tried to forget, and yet, here I was, standing at the back door of my childhood home, staring at the wrought iron gate that separated me from it. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of something strange, earthy, almost medicinal. I shivered, though the air wasn't cold enough to warrant it. I hadn't thought about this garden in years. It had been a place of refuge when I was younger, somewhere I'd escape to when life inside the house became too much. But it had always felt off, like it was alive in a way that other places weren't. The flowers, the overgrown vines, the wild plants, they grew in abundance, but they never seemed quite right. My father used to say it was the soil. He'd grown all kinds of plants, roses, lilies, lavender, but no matter what he planted, the garden always seemed to have a mind of its own. When I was a kid, I'd get lost in the thicket of it, my fingers running along the leaves, the thorns scraping my skin as I tried to keep up with the ever-growing tangle of greenery. My father would tell me not to wander too far. He'd say, "You never know what's hiding in there." I'd laugh it off then, thinking it was just his way of keeping me close. But now, standing in front of it again, I felt that same unease, creeping up my spine, and it was impossible to ignore. I fumbled with the key to the garden gate, my hands trembling slightly. I hadn't expected to feel so unsettled. Coming back here wasn't supposed to stir up this kind of emotion, but I wasn't prepared for the weight of it. The gate creaked open with a sound that made me wince, and I stepped into the garden. It had changed, but not in the way I thought it would. It was still wild, overgrown, but the plants seemed to have taken on an unnatural quality. The roses, once a vibrant red, were now almost black, their petals curled and shriveled as if they'd been burned by something. The vines twisted and knotted in strange patterns, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked further in, my boots crunching on the brittle grass. The garden felt wrong. It wasn't just the plants, it was the silence. No birds, no insects. Just the wind rustling through the trees, the occasional creak of a branch. I wandered deeper into the thicket, my fingers brushing against the damp stone of the old fountain my father had built. The water was still, stagnant, and yet something in the back of my mind told me it hadn't always been that way. There had been life in this garden once. There had been laughter, the sound of my father's voice telling me to watch out for, the thorns, the soft hum of a busy summer afternoon. But now it felt like a forgotten place, like a place where things had been left to rot. I knelt down, brushing the dirt off the base of an old rosebush that had been growing in a corner of the garden since I was a child. The flowers that bloomed there used to be white, pure. Now the petals were stained with dark red streaks like they had been touched by something sinister. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, an odd reflection on the old stone steps. But no, it was real. A faint shimmer, like something shifting in the shadows. I stood up quickly, brushing the dirt from my knees, and turned to look around. Nothing. My breath hitched, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I was being watched. Not just by the empty garden or the house, but by something deeper. Something that had been here for longer than I could comprehend. I swallowed hard and began to back away, turning my gaze to the distant house. It stood there, looming in the background, its windows dark and vacant. I wanted to leave. I wanted to go back to the safety of the city, to the noise of traffic and crowded streets, to the anonymity of life in a place that didn't care about me. But I couldn't. Not yet. I turned back to the garden, staring at the twisted plants, the strange and unsettling colors that seemed to bleed into each other. That's when I saw it again. Movement, a flicker of something just beyond the overgrown bushes. It was like a shadow shifting between the leaves. My heart stopped. Who's there? My voice was hoarse, trembling, but I forced the words out anyway. The only response was the wind, whispering through the trees. I strained my eyes, my pulse racing, trying to see what was hidden just beyond, the shadows. But nothing. Nothing at all. I turned quickly and ran back toward the gate. The plants seemed to tug at my clothes, the vines reaching out like they wanted to hold me there. I pushed through them, my breath coming in sharp gasps, and finally stumbled back onto the path leading to the house. I slammed the gate shut behind me and stood there for a moment, leaning against the rusted iron as I tried to catch my breath. The garden had always been a place of mystery, but now it was something else. It wasn't just overgrown. It was alive in a way I couldn't understand. A place where the past and present bled into each other like ink running into water. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been waiting for me there. Something tied to the very roots of the land itself. I turned away from the garden and headed back inside the house, but the unease gnawed at me. What had I just felt? What was watching me? And why did it feel like it had known I would return? I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in me when I left the garden. Something had stirred inside, like an itch I couldn't scratch, and it gnawed at me long after I had crossed the threshold back into the house. The unease was settling deeper now, like a weight pressing on my chest. But it wasn't just the garden that had me on edge. It was everything. The house, the town, the memories of my parents. They all seemed to blur together into a fog I couldn't escape. I went to the kitchen, trying to steady myself. The old house was still exactly how I remembered it. Dusty, wood, cracked tiles, an overwhelming smell of mothballs mixed with the faint scent of lavender my mother used to grow in the windowsill. I had never realized how much the house smelled like her until now. I pulled out a mug from the cupboard and poured myself some coffee, though my hands were still shaking from what I'd seen in the garden. It wasn't just the rose bush. No, there was something more. Something beneath the surface, like the earth itself was calling to me. I took a sip of the hot coffee, trying to calm my racing thoughts, when my eyes landed on the small photo on the windowsill. It was an old one, taken on the day we moved into this house. My father standing in the yard with me in his arms, my mother beside him. We were all so happy back then, so alive. I closed my eyes, trying to banish the image of the garden from my mind, but it wouldn't leave me. The strange shadows, the overwhelming sense that something was watching me. It was like the garden had become a living, breathing entity, a place where time didn't flow the way it should. Suddenly, I heard it. A noise. A soft scraping sound coming from the direction of the garden. My heart skipped in my chest, and I stiffened, my eyes darting toward the window. I hadn't noticed it before, but the house sat on a slight hill, and from the kitchen window I had a clear view of the garden's edge. the gate, the tangled mess of overgrowth. I took another step toward the window, heart pounding in my throat, when I saw it. A figure. But it wasn't a person. It was a shape, a blur of movement just beyond the rusted gate. I squinted, trying to make out details, but the figure was moving too fast. It was like watching a shadow shift in the corner of your eye, something that didn't quite belong. I grabbed the mug, sloshing coffee onto my hand, but I barely noticed the burn. The figure was still there, pacing along the garden's edge, disappearing and reappearing in the same erratic motion. My breath caught in my throat. What the hell was that? I darted for the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wasn't going to sit inside and wait for whatever that was to come closer. I needed answers, needed to see it for myself. I wasn't the kind of person who ran from things, not anymore, especially not now that I was back in Hollow's End. I hadn't come all the way here to be haunted by memories. The wind had picked up outside as I stepped into the backyard, and I could feel it biting at my skin. The air had that sharp tang of impending rain, but the clouds hadn't gathered yet. Everything felt wrong. The garden stood before me, as wild and tangled as I remembered, but now it felt like something I couldn't outrun. The rusted gate creaked in the wind, and I hesitated for only a moment before I pushed it open, the old metal scraping against the stone. The garden looked unchanged at first glance, but I knew better now. There was something lurking here, something waiting. I stepped cautiously between the rose bushes and the thicket of vines. The dark roses swayed gently in the breeze, their petals curling at the edges, like they were reaching for something. Then, I heard the sound again. That soft scraping, like something or someone was walking through the garden, their shoes dragging along the stones. Hello? My voice barely broke through the wind. No answer. I pressed on, deeper into the garden, following the faint noise. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, of wet leaves, and something else I couldn't quite place. It felt like the garden was closing in around me, the plants growing taller, the shadows getting longer. As I rounded a corner near the back of the garden, the noise stopped. Silence. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, and then I saw it. A figure, tall, draped in dark clothing and standing near the edge of the garden where the trees began to thin. It wasn't the shape I had seen earlier. It was something more solid now. A woman hunched over, her hands deep in the soil. Her hair was wild, tangled, and her back was bowed as if the weight of something heavy was on her. I wanted to call out, but my throat went dry. The figure didn't move. The wind held its breath. And for a moment, the only sound in the garden was the rustle of the leaves, and then the figure turned, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes. There was something wrong with her eyes. They were hollow, empty, dark like the spaces between stars. Who are you? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the wind. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she straightened and began walking toward me, each step slow, deliberate, like the earth was holding her up, pushing her forward. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, and I backed away, my feet tangled in the vines as I tripped over a rose bush. I wanted to run, to scream, to tear myself away from this garden that had become a nightmare, but I couldn't move. The figure stopped a few feet away, standing just outside my reach. She tilted her head, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Ilara," she whispered, her voice low and cracked. "It's good to see you again." And I knew. I knew who this woman was before she even spoke again. She was Anthea Blackthorne, the gardener, and I was home. The weight of the garden's silence pressed in on me, suffocating. Anthea Blackthorne stood before me, her eyes endless voids, her smile twisted and too knowing. I felt as though the earth itself was watching, waiting. Every inch of me screamed to run, to turn and bolt back to the safety of the house. But my feet stayed planted. I couldn't move, couldn't think. "Ilara?" Anthea's voice coiled around my name like a whisper on the wind. "You've come back, haven't you?" I shook my head, but the words lodged in my throat, making it hard to breathe. How did she know my name? How did she know I'd returned? And why the hell was she standing here like some ghost from the past in the very garden I had only just discovered? Her form was still, like a statue. Too still, too perfect. Her clothes, ragged and torn at the edges, fluttered lightly in the wind, but there was no movement in her. She looked at me with those empty, hollow eyes, as if she were reading something deep inside me. I've been waiting, Anthea continued, her voice dipping low, waiting for someone like you to come. She took a slow step forward, her shoes dragging across the dirt like a shiver running down my spine. Waiting for me? I stammered, my throat dry, my voice small. Why? What are you... Before I could finish, she raised a hand, silencing me. The gesture was so fluid, so unnatural, that I barely registered the movement before the air around us seemed to thicken. This garden, she said, her voice carrying an eerie reverence, is bound by blood. Your blood, Ilara. It has been calling to you long before you arrived. Your grandmother knew this place. She tended to it just as you will. The roots run deep, child. Far deeper than you can understand. The words sent a chill down my spine. My grandmother. I had barely known her, but my mother had always told stories of her. Of the mysterious woman who lived in this house before me. The woman who had always been somewhat odd. My mother never spoke much about her, though. Just the occasional mention of her gardening habits, her strange whispers in the night, and the way the townsfolk seemed to avoid her. It was as if my grandmother had been something of a recluse tied to the house and its secrets. But now, standing in front of this woman, this figure that wasn't quite real, I felt like there was a missing piece. Something I couldn't see. Something I didn't know. You don't know what you're talking about, I said, though the words felt hollow. I felt a sickening weight in my chest, like a clock ticking away the seconds. My grandmother's dead. She died when I was young. Anthea tilted her head almost curiously before she spoke again. That's what you've been told. But there's more to the story. There always has been. The garden, it doesn't forget, Ilara. It holds memories, even the ones you've buried. I wanted to step back, to flee from whatever strange hold she had over me. But something in the garden, something in the ground beneath my feet, kept me rooted in place. I glanced down, and the earth seemed to pulse under me. A ripple, like something moving. It was subtle at first, but as I watched, I saw it again. A shift in the dirt. A shift in the very fabric of the land. Let me show you. Anthea's voice broke through my thoughts. And before I could protest, she moved, slow and deliberate, her feet barely touching the ground. I watched her as if in a trance, as if I couldn't look away even if I wanted to. She led me to a part of the garden I hadn't yet noticed. The roses here were thicker, darker, their petals like velvet, tinged with a deep crimson that seemed unnatural in the fading sunlight. There was a small stone circle in the center of the patch, cracked and weathered by time. You feel it, don't you? She asked, her voice like the rustling of leaves in a forgotten place. The energy. It flows through you now, whether you want it or not. I reached out instinctively, my hand trembling as I brushed my fingers across one of the petals. A sharp pain shot through me, a sting that made me gasp. But when I pulled my hand back, I saw nothing. No blood, no mark. Just the memory of pain, like a shadow lingering in the air. What is this? I asked, my voice breaking. What's happening to me? Anthea's eyes gleamed with a strange satisfaction. You've awakened it. The garden has chosen you, Ilara. Just like it chose your grandmother before you. And like her, you'll learn what it means to tend to the roots. She stepped closer, her voice softer now. The garden doesn't just grow flowers, Ilara. It grows memories, and those memories, they never leave. The weight of her words settled over me, pressing in from all sides. The pain in my hand was gone, but I could feel something else, something much deeper, like the earth itself was calling to me. I knew that whatever I had stumbled into, it wasn't just a garden. It was a living thing, a thing that had been waiting for me, waiting for someone who carried the blood of the Blackthorn family, and it would not let me leave. The garden was no longer just a place. It was alive in a way I couldn't fully comprehend. It was breathing, its roots twisting beneath the surface, reaching for something, reaching for me. Anthea Blackthorn stood like a sentinel in the fading light, watching me, waiting for me to fully understand. But I wasn't ready. I couldn't be. I had to leave. I had to run. But even as I turned, I felt the pull. The soil beneath my feet seemed to tighten, like fingers curling around my ankles. The roses, their vibrant crimson petals whispered in the wind, their stems bending toward me as though they were reaching out to claim me. I staggered back, but every step away felt heavier than the last. "Ilara," Anthea called, her voice soft but somehow louder than the wind. "Where do you think you're going?" Her words cut through me. My chest tightened, my heart pounding. I could feel the weight of the garden pressing in on me, the air thick with something I couldn't escape, something ancient, something hungry. I tried to speak, but no words came out. The garden seemed to hum with life, its energy pulsing like a heartbeat beneath my feet. I wanted to scream, to beg for freedom, but all I could do was stand there, rooted in place. "Don't you see?" Anthea continued, stepping closer. "You've been a part of this place from the very beginning. Your blood runs through the earth here. You belong here, just as your grandmother did." The mention of my grandmother sent a shock through me. I wanted to deny it, to shake it off as some twisted delusion, but I could feel it, my grandmother's presence here in the garden. She wasn't just a memory. She had been a part of it, a part of this. Why? I finally managed to croak. My voice was hoarse, strained. "Why me? Why the garden?" Anthea smiled, a slow, knowing smile that chilled me to the bone. "Because you are the heir, Ilara. The garden chooses its own, and you've been chosen. You can feel it, can't you? The power flowing through you, pulling you back. It's in your blood. The garden never forgets, and it never lets go." The ground beneath my feet trembled. I felt it again, the tugging sensation, pulling me deeper into the earth. Something inside me screamed to break free, to run, to escape. But the more I tried to resist, the more the garden seemed to tighten its grip on me. "Ilara," Anthea whispered, stepping closer still. "This is where you belong. This is where your family has always belonged. The garden is alive, and it grows with each generation. It thrives on the memories, the blood, the love, the pain. Everything that's ever been is here, waiting for you to accept it." I looked down at my hands, shaking violently. There were thorns in the soil now, twisting and curling around my ankles like snakes. I could feel them pricking my skin, tiny, little stabs of pain that seemed to go deeper, like the garden itself was drawing blood. "No," I whispered, the word escaping my lips before I could stop it. "I don't want this." "You don't have a choice." Anthea's voice was soft but firm, the kind of voice that was both maternal and threatening. "The garden is always here, Ilara, and once it claims you, it never lets you go. Not entirely. You can run, but you'll always return. The roots are in you, they always have been." A horrible realization washed over me. This wasn't just about the garden. This wasn't just about plants and flowers and roses. This was about me, my family, my blood. I had been tied to this place from the moment I was born, just as my grandmother had been before me. And as much as I wanted to fight it, as much as I wanted to run, I knew that I couldn't. I had already accepted it. The garden was in my veins now. It would never let me go. Suddenly, the air around us grew colder. The wind picked up, howling through the garden like an animal in pain. The roses around me began to move, their tendrils wrapping around my arms, my legs pulling me deeper into the soil. I struggled, my hands slick with sweat, but the thorns dug deeper, and the more I fought, the stronger the pull became. "Ilara," Anthea whispered again, her voice like a lullaby. "Don't fight it. It's time." I looked around at the garden, at the darkened roses, the twisted vines, the overgrown path, and I understood. The garden wasn't just a place. It was a memory, a curse, a legacy. It was everything that had ever been and everything that was still to come. And I was a part of it now, whether I wanted to be or not. With a final desperate gasp, I surrendered. The thorns wrapped tightly around my wrists and ankles, pulling me down into the earth. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was Anthea's smile, a smile that was both kind and cruel, a smile that promised no escape. And then, everything went silent. When the townsfolk came by the next day, they found the Yi garden as it had always been, lush, vibrant, untamed. The roses bloomed brighter than ever before, their petals almost glowing in the early morning light. But there was something new. At the center of the garden, where the soil had once been bare, there was a single rose bush. The petals were the color of my sundress, pale yellow, almost glowing. As they bent to inspect it, they could hear the faintest sound, something almost like a heartbeat echoing through the roots. It was soft, steady, and unmistakable. The garden had claimed its newest caretaker, and it would never forget her. I can still feel the chill of that first autumn wind rattling the windows of Blackwood Manor. Even now, all these years later, I was 15 when my father first drove me up the winding lane to Raven's Hollow, a town swallowed by mist and whispering pines. He said it would be good for me, as if the weight on my shoulders could be lifted by acres of neglected lawn and peeling wallpaper. But I found only history breathing through the cracks in the walls, and a promise of something darker. My earliest memories of the house are wrapped in velvet shadows and the distant hollow chime of the grandfather clock in the entry hall. My cousins, Lucas, stubborn and silent even at that age, and Daniel, bold to the point of recklessness, had arrived days before, scouring the attic for old toys and Civil War relics. I watched them through the frosted glass of the dining room door, marveling at how at ease they seemed here. Their laughter bounced off the high ceilings, unafraid of the portraits that lined the walls, grim-eyed ancestors in stiff collars, their faces carved by time into expressions that felt less human and more waiting. I wasn't one of the bloodline, not directly, so at first I thought myself exempt from whatever legacy weighed down these halls. My father had married in decades ago when the house was still whole. Rose gardens out front, a nurse's wing off to the east, and stories of a wealthy lineage unbroken since the 1850s. But time had eroded those rose beds and boarded up the nurse's wing. The gossip was that in the 20s the manor had been a sanatorium, then a retirement home, until something happened in the 50s, something they never spoke of. Sheets of yellowed prayers taped to the windows said more than any conversation. On that first night, though, I was too busy unpacking to notice the sting of the air. My bedroom was small, tucked between the servants' quarters and the chapel. Once, a private chapel, now stripped of its pews and draped in plastic sheeting. My suitcase sat half open on the floor, its contents scattered. Novels, a worn denim jacket, and a faded photograph of my mother standing beside grandfather Elias on his wedding day, both smiling into the sunshine. I remember thinking how out of place that warmth looked here. By midnight, the house had begun its slow, persistent groan. Floorboards sighed beneath unseen feet, and somewhere inside me a pulse quickened. I closed my eyes, willing the noises to stop, but instead I heard a whisper, barely more than the brush of silk, call my name. I sat up, my heart hammering, and saw in the pale moonlight the curve of the attic stairs just beyond my door. They hadn't installed a latch, so I could see straight up into the gloom. I should have gone back to sleep. I should have convinced myself it was the wind or a stray branch scraping the glass. But curiosity has a way of trumping common sense. I slipped from the bed, bare feet brushing the cold floor, and crept toward the door. The whisper came again, softer this time, a longing huff at the edge of my hearing. My hand hovered over the doorknob. the metal cool and unyielding beneath my palm. Then lightning flickered through the window, and for the fraction of a second I saw them. Dozens of faces pressed against the attic's lower window pane, as if the dust had sculpted them in relief. Hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, their mouths twisted in silent screams. I gasped and stumbled back, my back hitting the wall with a hollow thud. The faces vanished, leaving only darkness and my own ragged breathing. I ran then, down the hallway and into my cousin Daniel's room. He was asleep, oblivious. I shook him until he woke, eyes bleary, and babbled the whole thing. Faces, whisper, attic. He frowned, sat up, and then looked at me with that half-anguished, half-amused expression I'd come to know too well. "There's always something in this place," he said, reaching out to steady me. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor, Hannah." And just like that, I knew I was bound here. Not by choice, but by birthright, inheritance, and the shadow that waited to claim us all. The morning light in Blackwood Manor is a pale ghost of sun. You expect warmth, but you only get a brittle glow that slips through dusty panes and settles on fractured floorboards. I woke stiff and disoriented in Daniel's extra bed, the echo of my pounding heart still thunderous in my ears. He was already up, flipping through a leather-bound book of funeral rites that grandfather had acquired somewhere along the way. "Nothing good ever happens before coffee," Daniel muttered, looking up. He handed me a chipped mug of bitter instant. I wrapped my fingers around it, relishing the heat. Outside, fog clung to the grounds in ghostly tendrils. The skeletal branches of ancient oaks swayed, their shadows tracing dark fingers across the hallway wall. Lucas appeared in the doorway, dark-haired and dour-eyed, clutching a crumpled map of the manor's blueprints. He pressed it into our hands, his voice low. "I found this in grandfather's office. The nurses' wing was expanded in 27, then sealed off in 52. There are tunnels." I drank down the rest of my coffee. My stomach churned as I imagined, hidden corridors snaking beneath the house. "Tunnels for what?" I asked. Lucas licked his lips. "Elias said he'd show us someday. Called them the veins of the manor. But he died last night before he could." His words hovered between us, a fresh bruise. Daniel slammed his book shut. "We need to be careful. Whatever's here knows more about this place than we do. And if it's feeding..." He didn't finish the sentence. We spent the afternoon exploring the ground floor. The dining room still bore the imprint of last night's tragedy. A single chair overturned, a splash of muddy rainwater staining the rug where grandfather had fallen. Margaret's favorite silver candelabra sat cold and unlit, its candles melted to stubby nubs. I knelt and touched the edge of the table. It was slick where someone had wiped his blood away. A faint metallic scent lingered in the air. Upstairs, we traced the attic stairs again. A single plank along the handrail was gouged as though something sharp had scraped through the wood. Daniel ran a fingertip along the groove. I watched a black sliver of something, maybe dried resin, maybe something else, flake off. I made myself look at it. The scrapings were too irregular for a tool, more like talons or claws. That night, after dinner, stew too salty for hunger, bread too tough to comfort, Margaret retreated to her room, her shoulders curved like a question. "Mark." Lucas and Daniel argued softly about whether to return to the attic for answers or leave it buried. I stayed silent, listening to the muffled sobs drifting from grandmother's chamber. The house, it seemed, was crying too. Copper pipes sighed, walls groaned, and every so often a sharp knock would come from inside the plaster, a hollow report, like a fist against a coffin. I felt it beneath my feet as though the house had a pulse. Unable to bear the tension, I slipped away to the library, once grandfather's sanctuary of travelogues and dust-wrapped journals. The shelves bowed under the weight of generations. I found the leather spine I'd glimpsed the night before, my great-grandfather's journal, its title stamped in faded gold, Inheritance of Shadows. By candlelight, I read about a curse laid by a wronged servant in 1893, a promise that the Blackwood line would pay for every injustice done within these walls. The writer confessed to sealing the servant in a hidden chamber, and to hearing her screams echo through the house each All Hallows Eve. The last page ended abruptly, as though the author had been yanked away mid-sentence. And I fear, tonight she comes for me. A cold draft snuffed my candle. In the glass of the window behind me I saw the shape of a woman, her hair lank with mud, her eyes hollow wells of despair. I spun around. The room was empty. When I faced the journal, again its pages were blank. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat huddled under a window seat, every creak and whisper magnified. At 3:17 a.m., the house shifted decisively, and I heard it. The distant scraping of metal on stone, like chains being dragged through a tunnel. My breath hitched. If Lucas was right, those veins, those tunnels, were opening tonight. I gathered my courage and sought out Lucas and Daniel. The corridors were darker than I remembered, the lights flickering as though struggling to stay alive. Outside the nursery, now a locked door behind which medicine odors still lingered, I heard Lucas's soft chant, reciting passages from the journal in a voice that trembled but did not waver. Daniel stood beside him, holding a lantern that cast more shadow than light. His jaw was set. "We have to face this," he whispered. "Together." As they pulled the hidden latch beneath the doorframe, a low moan seeped through the crack and the floor trembled beneath our feet. The manor's heart was stirring, and tonight, we were its unwilling conquerors. Our lantern's glow trembled against the peeling wallpaper as Lucas pulled the hidden latch. A soft click, almost apologetic, was swallowed by the manor's sighing breath. Daniel braced the door and we eased inside. The smell hit me first. Damp earth mingled with something metallic, like fresh blood. Every footstep echoed as though the corridor itself was mocking us. We found ourselves in a narrow tunnel lined with stone blocks, the plaster of the nursery's back wall cut away to reveal a rough-hewn arch. Water dripped from the ceiling, forging rivulets that pooled at our boots. Lucas squinted at the crumbling map in his hand. "This runs under the entire east wing," he whispered, voice low. "There should be chambers, one marked servants. Room." I swallowed hard. In the journal it had felt like myth. Down here claustrophobia gripped me. The walls closed in until the air tasted thick. I could hear my pulse in my ears, the slow drum of blood against bone. Still, I pressed on. "Look at these markings," Daniel said, stooping to trace a series of symbols carved into the stone. Spirals, crosses, and something that looked like a woman's weeping face. The grooves were slick with greenish residue, copper from old pipes or something far older. I shivered. "Ritual," I breathed. The passage veered left, then right, and split again. Lucas pointed to 2 slashes on the map nearly erased. "Chamber A or B. One is the servants' room, the other. Who knows?" Daniel lifted the lantern higher. Damp threads of spiderweb caught in its beam, sparkling like fractured glass. We chose the left corridor, footsteps light, a distant scrape, stone. On stone sent our blood running cold. We froze, listening. Then came another sound. A soft, sobbing breath, echoing somewhere ahead. Lucas waited until we were close, then yanked aside a hanging vine of roots. Behind it lay a crude door of rotten oak, iron hinges rusted through. Daniel's knuckles turned, white as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was thicker, and a single beam of moonlight filtered through a barred grate far above, illuminated a bare stone cot. Chains lay coiled on the floor beside it. The sobbing was louder now, impossibly close, yet no figure stirred in the gloom. I stepped forward, heart pounding. My foot brushed something soft on the floor. I knelt. A scrap of fabric. Once white, now a dull gray, stiff as old parchment. The odor of decay rose in my nostrils. A sudden gust rattled the grate. The lantern flickered, and in that unstable light I saw her. A woman in a soiled gown, hair tangled with twigs and earth, eyes glowing, like embers. She hovered above the cot, wrists ghosting against the chains she'd worn. Her lips moved, forming words too faint to hear. Lucas backed away, knocking over the lantern. Flames guttered and died, plunging us into blackness. Panic roared in my chest. I grabbed Daniel's arm, but he was transfixed, his face pale in the brief afterglow. Then the sobbing stopped. Silence fell so complete it rang in my ears. A footstep, soft but deliberate, echoed on the stone beyond the doorway. We scrambled to relight the lantern. Sparks hissed, the wick caught, and the room burst into light. The woman was gone. Chains lay empty. Yet behind us, in the corridor, a pair of footprints pressed into the muddy floor. One adult's, one child's. Both bare. Daniel's voice shook. They're here. We retraced our steps, tension knotting every muscle. The tunnel widened, opening onto a small chamber where broken furniture lay in rot. Here the sobbing started again, but now we heard laughter, soft, childish, rippling beneath it. I spun, heart in my throat, and glimpsed in the lantern's periphery the outline of a small boy stepping into view. Dark hair, hollow eyes, skin chalky. He tilted his head, crooked grin like a scalpel. Before I could react, he vanished through the wall. The laughter turned mocking, then ceased as abruptly as it began. Lucas exhaled, voice trembling. Enough. Daniel pressed a hand to the damp stone. No. We need to know what it wants. I looked at them both, fear coiling tight, and realized this house didn't just hold ghosts. It was a trap, and we'd woken something ancient, something that wouldn't rest until it had claimed us all. Behind us, the tunnel door groaned shut. The finality of it shook me to my core. We get out now, I said. They nodded. Together, we turned toward the thin line of light at the corridor's end, uncertain if it led back to safety or deeper into Blackwood's hungry heart. The return to the nursery corridor felt surreal, like emerging from water into sky. But our tunnel lantern cast long, wavering shadows that made every curve and alcove seem alive. My legs trembled, each step sounding far too loud on the damp stone. Behind me, Lucas clutched the map as though it were his only lifeline. Daniel, lantern raised high, scanned the walls for any sign of pursuit. We pressed on toward the glow of the attic stairs, but the corridor forked again. This time, the map showed neither path clearly. The laughter of the boy and the woman's distant sobbing had merged into a maddening echo that danced just beyond our hearing. It felt like the house was moving, reconfiguring itself to trap us in its bowels. This way, Lucas murmured, gesturing down the right passage. We followed, trusting his instinct. But a half-dozen strides later, the passage ended at a solid stone wall. Daniel slammed his fist against it. The echo was deafening. Dust drifted down, coating our shoulders. We've been turned around, he said, voice tight. This place, he swallowed. It's alive. I knelt to study the wall. The blocks were irregular, seams sealed with crumbled mortar. There was no door, no latch, only silence. My heart pounded so fiercely, I half expected it to burst. Try the other way, I said, pushing to my feet. But even as I spoke, a low, resonant thrum began beneath our boots like the beating of a monstrous heart. The air grew thicker. Moisture condensed on the walls. The lantern's light dimmed as though the darkness were swallowing it whole. Lucas's voice cracked. We need to move, now. We sprinted back to the fork and took the left path, adrenaline sharpening every sense. The thrum grew, and I realized it was coming from ahead. My pulse hammered in time with it. We rounded a corner and froze. The tunnel opened into a vast subterranean chamber, vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood 4 massive pillars, carved with the same weeping woman symbol, their bases slick with moisture. Between them lay a shallow pit, rimmed with rusted iron. A faint sickly light, pale green, glowed from its depths. Daniel swallowed. The servant's room, he whispered, or her grave. Lucas raised the lantern, and for a moment I could see the pit's contents. Twisted lengths of chain, scraps of cloth, and an indistinct shape coiled at the bottom. The sobbing rose again, urgent and lacerating. Stay together, I said. My voice sounded foreign in the cavernous space. Careful not to slip, I edged toward the pit. The moment my lantern light touched the bottom, the sobbing ceased, and a single guttural whisper drifted upward. "Join me." Daniel yanked my sleeve. No. But I couldn't look away. In the green glow I saw her, the servant, eyes brimming with rage and sorrow, her mouth stretched in a silent scream. Around her, shadows flickered, dozens of them, each one a fragment of lost souls. The ground trembled. From the corners of the chamber, the child's laughter echoed, growing sharper, more manic. In every direction, dark shapes slithered along the walls, converging toward us. Lucas dropped the map and bolted for the exit corridor. Daniel and I followed, stumbling over rubble, the iron chains ringing out as they dragged behind us. As we ran, the laughter and sobbing merged into a cacophony that threatened to shred our minds. Behind us, the chamber doors, ancient stone plates, scraped across the floor, sealing the pit once more. I dared a glance back. The servant's face pressed against the narrow gap where the door had been, eyes blazing. Then the gap closed, and the silence returned, heavier than before. We didn't stop until the tunnel turned upward, sloping toward the nursery door. When we burst into the nursery, gasping, the first shards of dawn were coloring the curtains. Our lantern's glow seemed obscene here, too bright against the pale wallpaper. Daniel sank to his knees beside the iron candelabra. "We can't stay," he said, voice raw. "She'll come tonight stronger." Lucas wiped his forehead, map forgotten at his feet. "We need a plan," he panted. "We need—" A sudden crack behind us made all three of us whirl around. The heavy nursery door had swung shut. In the narrow slit of darkness beneath it, two flaming red eyes blinked once, then vanished. I swallowed audibly. "There's no plan." I looked at their faces, pale and haunted in the morning light. "There's just survival." And so we gathered ourselves, returning upstairs to wake Grandmother and Margaret with the news, knowing that Blackwood Manor would not rest, and neither could we, until its curse had run its bloody course. That night, the manor felt awake. Every floorboard groaned with purpose. Every gust of wind rattled more insistently against the windows. I stood in the foyer with Daniel and Lucas, the three of us silhouetted by the glow of a single hallway lamp. Margaret and Grandmother had refused to believe our stories. Too much death, too little proof. So we knew the weight of this confrontation rested on our shoulders alone. Daniel held the journal my great-grandfather left behind, its leather cover cracked and softened by decades of grief. Lucas carried a coil of iron chain we'd dragged from the servants' chamber, and I clutched a small vial of salt and rosemary, ingredients from the medicine man's lodge, blessed by fire, water, earth, and air. Our voices trembled as we reviewed the plan, reenact the binding ritual, confront the servant spirit, and free the trapped souls from the pit beneath the east wing. We crept through the darkened halls toward the old chapel. Once it had been bright, with sun streaming through stained glass. Now the windows were boarded, and the pulpit was draped in moth-eaten velvet. The air smelled of damp and dust, but beneath that I caught a hint of something sharp, like freshly upturned dirt. The same scent had clung to the servants' chamber. Daniel whispered the opening invocation from the journal, his voice echoing unnaturally. "By blood and bone, by chain and stone, I call thee forth from flesh and bone. Release the captive, end the night, let broken souls return to light." At once the temperature plunged. My breath formed misty clouds before me. Lucas placed a line of salt and rosemary at the threshold of the pulpit, forming a crude circle. I spread the iron chain across the floorboards in a rough spiral, knotting its rings at cardinal points. Then, a wind rose from somewhere overhead, rattling the rafters. Candle flames, melted wax drippings on old stands, flickered to life, casting dancing shadows that lengthened and twisted. From the darkness at the back of the chapel, the servant emerged. Her gown, once white, was now a patchwork of mud and cobwebs. Her eyes glowed with the same ember-red fury I'd seen in the pit. She glided forward, wrists bound by spectral chains that rattled in time with her breathless sobs. "Why do you disturb my rest?" she hissed. voice hollow as dry leaves. Daniel stepped forward, journal trembling in his hand. You were betrayed, sealed alive so your pain would feed this house. We offer release. The servant laughed, a sound like cracking bones. She raised a hand, and the chains coiled tighter around her wrists, rattling like an earthquake. Shadows peeled from the corners of the room, forming shapes of children in outdated clothing, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent pleas. They drifted toward us, pulling at the chain's ends. Lucas tightened his grip on the chain's free end. By this chain of iron, by our vow of mercy, we bind your anguish and free your soul, he cried, stepping into the circle. He braced himself as the children's shadows surged forward, their small hands brushing the chain. The sulphurous air vibrated with their anguished wails. I poured the salt and rosemary into the center of the spiral, the herbs hissing as they landed. A sudden crash, a candle stand collapsed behind me, and then nothing but silence, so deep it roared in my ears. The servant's form flickered, her eyes widening in shock. She looked down at the spiral of chain and salt, then back at us, recognition dawning on her tortured face. With a final, keening wail, she sank to her knees. The spectral chains dissolved like mist. One by one, the children's shadows drifted back into the walls, their mouths curving into expressions of relief. I closed my eyes and repeated the closing words from the journal. Take back what was, never yours to keep. Return to peace in life or sleep. A wind gusted through the boarded windows, extinguishing all but one candle. In its glow, the servant's form turned human again. A young woman, tear-streaked and trembling, longing for rest. She offered a sad smile, then melted into motes of dust that drifted upward and vanished into the rafters. Daniel exhaled, slumping against the pulpit. Lucas sank beside him, the chain at last silent. I wiped sweat from my brow, relief and exhaustion mingling in my limbs. When daylight crept through the cracks of the front door, we were still in the chapel, too drained to move. Outside, the oak trees swayed gently, the wind no longer howling. The house felt still. No creaks, no groans, just the steady tick of the grandfather clock. Margaret found us there, faces drawn but victorious. She didn't speak. She only nodded. And in that nod, I knew Blackwood Manor had finally released its hold on us. Weeks later, we locked the attic and sealed the tunnel. The manor's sale went through, no longer a menace but a restored relic of history. I visited once more, standing on the front steps with the morning sun on my face, and for the first time, I felt the manor's weight lift. As I turned away, I could almost hear a soft whisper of thanks riding the breeze, faint but unmistakable. Blackwood Manor still stands atop that lonely hill, but its shadows no longer hunt the living. Sometimes I wonder if the past is ever truly laid to rest. But in that moment, as the doors click shut, I believe that some things, like mercy, can save us all. There are places the world forgets, quiet, rotting corners that never quite crawl out from beneath the shadow of their own past. For me, that place was Blackwood Hollow. I grew up about 30 miles east of there, in a town called Truro. Nothing much ever happened there unless you count high school football and the annual pumpkin fair. But every weekend from the fall of 2019 through early 2020, I found myself in Blackwood Hollow, a place locals never talked about unless it was in hushed tones, usually over a pint at the only bar that stayed open past 9. My best friend Jake lived on the edge of that nowhere, in a sagging farmhouse that looked like it had been dragged halfway into the grave and changed its mind. His family had lived there for generations, though no one could tell you much about them. His grandfather had apparently gone missing out in the woods sometime in the 60s. They said he wandered into the trees one night and never came back. A bear got him, maybe, or he just wanted out. Either way, the woods didn't give him back. There were 4 of us back then. Me, Liam Carter, Jake, Ethan, and Noah. We were 17, still dumb enough to believe nothing bad could happen to us. Every Friday night, we'd grab our flashlights, bundle up in hoodies and winter jackets, and head out behind Jake's place to play manhunt. Jake had hundreds of yards of forest and overgrown farmland behind his house, all wild and untouched. The ground was frozen, the trees clawing at the sky, and the cold cut deeper there, like the whole place was trapped in an earlier century. I remember that first night something felt off. It was early December 2019. We were out by Blackwood Pond, this half-frozen sliver of water tucked deep into the woods. Locals had all kinds of stories about it. Some said it never thawed completely, even in summer. Others claimed animals wouldn't go near it. I didn't believe any of that crap. We'd been there a few times before and nothing weird had ever happened. But that night, as we crunched through the snow toward the pond, I swear the silence started swallowing our voices. We laughed less. Our footsteps seemed louder. Then we noticed something strange. When we stopped walking, something else didn't. It came just a second after each of us stopped moving. A crunch behind us. A heavy one. Not like a deer or fox. Something bigger. Human-sized. At first we thought maybe one of us was messing with the others, but Ethan's voice was tight when he whispered, "Did you guys hear that?" We stood still for a while listening. The trees whispered in the wind. Then, crunch. Again. One step, a second too late. Deliberate. Jake muttered, "It's probably an echo or something." But we all knew it wasn't. We turned back without saying anything more. The cold felt deeper, like it was sinking through our skin. I remember turning around at one point just to check, and I could have sworn I saw something behind a tree. A figure, maybe. Tall. Still. Too still. But when I blinked, it was gone. We didn't talk about it when we got back to the house. We went inside, turned on some horror movie, and buried it beneath jokes and popcorn. That's how teenage boys deal with fear. We bury it under noise. But that night, as I lay in my sleeping bag on Jake's living room floor, the wind howled through the trees, and the thought kept looping in my mind. Something was out there, and it had noticed us. It was the kind of cold that didn't just bite. It clung to your skin. Late January had rolled in with overcast skies and a silence that made the woods behind Jake's place feel paused somehow, like even nature was holding its breath. That Saturday started like any other. We were bored, restless. Jake's mom was working a double at the clinic in town, and his dad hadn't been around in weeks, divorce stuff. So we had the whole place to ourselves. The farmhouse creaked like it always did, like it was remembering something it didn't want to. Noah had the bright idea to head deeper into the woods, farther than we usually went. He'd heard about an old cabin ruin out there, one that hunters or trappers used back in the 1800s. Most of the local stories about Blackwood Hollow were just that, stories. We didn't think much of it. We were just 4 teenage idiots with too much caffeine and not enough sense. We bundled up, grabbed flashlights, and started hiking through the snow-crusted underbrush. The deeper we went, the less we talked. Trees, pressed in tighter, the sun barely cutting through the cloud cover. It got quieter. Even the birds were gone. After about 40 minutes, we found it. What was left of it, anyway. Just a moss-covered rectangle of broken stone and rotting beams. It had clearly been a structure once. You could still see where the doorway used to be, the base of a wood stove, and the outline of a hearth swallowed by weeds. It felt forgotten, like the forest wanted it buried. Jake kicked at the debris, uncovering a section of cracked floorboards. "Help me pry this up," he said. I didn't want to. Something about it felt wrong. Not dramatic wrong, just off. But I helped anyway. We wedged a branch underneath and cracked it open. The smell hit immediately. Not rot exactly, but like old iron and mold. Earth that hadn't breathed in decades. Jake coughed, waved it off. We peered in. Nothing but darkness below. Maybe a root cellar once. Or a crawl space. Ethan, of course, joked about finding bones. "Maybe it's a murder pit," he laughed, grinning. But no one laughed back. We didn't stay much longer. The cold started to feel sharper, like it was coming from the pit itself. And the woods around us, they just seemed still. Not calm, just watching. That night back at Jake's place, we tried to shrug it off. We drank warm soda, played Call of Duty, and made fun of Ethan for nearly falling in the pit. But none of us brought up the smell, or the way the trees looked darker walking back. Around midnight, the power cut out. No warning, no flicker, just gone. The TV shut off. The heater died with a wheeze, and all the lights snapped out like someone threw a switch. Jake swore. Noah looked out the window. Nothing. The whole property was dark. We fumbled with our phones. Mine was at 18%, the flashlight barely cutting through the thick dark of the house. I tried to text my dad, but had no bars. None of us did. Then we heard thump from the basement. Not loud, but deep, like something heavy shifting. Jake's face went pale. "It's probably just the heater," he said too quickly. "Old place." But the heater wasn't running. No power, remember? We didn't go down. We stayed on the couch all night pretending to fall asleep. But I know none of us did. The next morning, power was back. Phones worked. Everything looked normal. Too normal. But Jake's dog wouldn't go near the basement door, and none of us talked about the pit again. The next weekend, Ethan was already waiting on the porch when I pulled up to Jake's house. His hood was up, and he had his phone out, scrolling through something he wasn't really reading. "You look like hell," I said, nudging his arm. "Didn't sleep," he mumbled. "Weird dreams." That made two of us. Mine had been vague. Trees bending the wrong way, something crawling across the ceiling. Every time I woke up, I could still hear breathing, but I hadn't told anyone. Not yet. Jake came out carrying his usual dented thermos, gave a small wave. "Power's been fine all week, nothing weird." He said it like he wanted us to believe him, like he needed it to be normal. We were supposed to play manhunt that night. It was tradition. Run through the woods with flashlights, hide behind trees, and old tractor parts. Childish? Maybe. But we were 17 and hanging on to the last threads of not quite adulthood. Noah showed up late, his truck tires crunching over the gravel. He looked rattled. "My little brother saw someone in our yard last night," he said, not even bothering with hello. Said it was tall, just standing by the trees. We all glanced at each other. Jake tried to brush it off. "Probably a deer. My brother's 7, not blind. We didn't cancel the game. I think we were too proud to admit we were spooked. Or maybe we just wanted to prove, to ourselves more than each other, that it was all in our heads. We set the boundary. Lines farther back than usual, past the rusted-out truck and into the edge of the deep woods. That was the first mistake. Ethan volunteered to hide first. We gave him 5 minutes, flashlights off, phones in pockets. When we started searching, the woods were quiet. Not creepy at first, just still. No wind, no rustling. Just the crunch of snow beneath our boots. "Noah, you check left," Jake said. "Liam, take the ridgeline." I nodded and peeled off. My breath fogged up in front of me. Every step sounded like it echoed too far. About 15 minutes in, I heard movement. Not ahead, behind me. I turned fast. Flashlight up. Nothing. "Ethan?" I called. No response. I moved slower now, flashlight darting between tree trunks. There was a pressure in the air, like when you're about to get bad news. Then I saw him, standing about 20 feet away. Still. Too still. "Ethan?" He didn't answer. I started walking closer, slowly. "Hey man, we found you, game over." He didn't move, just stared. Or at least I thought he was staring. It was hard to tell in the dark. And then he dropped to all fours. Fast, jerkily, like a puppet, he scuttled into the trees, spine arched wrong. I froze. That wasn't Ethan. I didn't move for 10 seconds. Maybe more. Then I turned and ran, full sprint, back toward the house, heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to break out. When I got back, Jake and Noah were already inside. Jake looked like he'd seen something too, but wasn't ready to say it out loud. "I saw something," I gasped. "It looked like Ethan, but it wasn't right." Jake didn't ask questions. He just grabbed a baseball bat from behind the door and locked the bolt. Ethan showed up an hour later, said he'd gotten lost, said he'd been walking in circles, but his voice was wrong. Just a little, like someone trying to mimic him, and his shoes were dry. We didn't talk about it that night. Not really. Jake made popcorn, Noah turned on Shaun of the Dead, and we sat there in silence pretending we were watching it. Ethan was on his phone the whole time, barely said 5 words. He laughed at one scene, but it was off, like he forgot how laughing actually sounded. I caught Jake staring at him, same way I was, not saying anything, just noticing. When the movie ended, Ethan stood up, stretched like nothing happened, and said, "I should head home." "No, man, stay over," Jake offered. "It's late." "I'm good." He left. The door clicked behind him, and I finally said it. His shoes were dry. Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah." And his hoodie was different. Noah frowned. "What?" "Swear he was wearing that gray one when we got here," Jake said. "But when he came back, it was blue. No logos. I didn't remember the hoodie, but I did remember the way he moved when I saw him in the woods, like his joints weren't lined up right." "Guys, what if that wasn't Ethan?" I asked. No one answered. Not really. Just that heavy silence again. We stayed up in Jake's room. Nobody said it, but none of us wanted to be alone. Jake pulled the blinds shut. Noah kept his flashlight on beside him, even though the power was working. We didn't sleep. Not really. I must have drifted off sometime around 2:30. When I blinked, awake, it was because Jake was shaking me. "Dude," he whispered, wide-eyed. "Look." I sat up. The room was dark, but I could see the glow of his digital clock across the room. 17 a.m. Right then, the lights flickered. Once, then again. Then all at once they shut off, and everything was swallowed in that weird, thick dark that didn't feel natural. Then came the noise, from below us, downstairs, like something dragging, a deep scrape along wood, then a single loud thud. We all froze. Jake whispered, "It's in the basement." Noah was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling my dad." "No signal," Jake said. "Try it." Noah checked. Shit, no bars. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever. Just breathing. Listening. Another thud. Closer this time. The floor under Jake's room creaked like weight shifting. "I swear to God, if this is some raccoon or something," Noah muttered, voice shaking. Jake grabbed his baseball bat again. "We're not going down there." No one argued. Eventually, the house went quiet. No creaking, no thuds, just stillness. The lights flicked back on at 3:32. "Exactly," Noah finally exhaled. "We need to tell someone." "Tell them what?" Jake said. "That our friend turned into a cryptid in the woods and our lights are haunted at 3:17 a.m. Noah didn't answer. I didn't either. I wanted to believe it was sleep deprivation or paranoia. Maybe some carbon monoxide leak. Something normal. But we knew. Deep down. Something was wrong with Ethan. And with this house. I left early the next morning. Didn't eat breakfast. Didn't even say goodbye. When I got home, I opened my phone and searched Blackwood Hollow Plus legends. Most of it was garbage, Reddit threads, ghost story blogs. But I found something. An old article from 1995. Local teen claims shadow. Man chased him near Blackwood Pond. Family moved away the following month. No name listed. Just a quote. "It watches from the trees. It doesn't want you to leave once you see it." Jake's family left without a word in April. One Friday they were there, his mom on the porch with her tea, his dad chopping wood. By Monday, the house was empty. Curtains drawn, the mailbox sealed with duct tape. It was like the Carsons never existed. I called Jake, no answer, texted him, just one check mark. Never turned blue. I didn't ask questions at first, none of us did. It's easier that way. Ethan still came to school, but he wasn't the same. He'd sit with us at lunch and stare past our table. like watching something behind us. His sentences were short, disconnected. He'd start saying one thing and end in a whisper. A few times he flinched when someone tapped him on the shoulder. I stopped trying after a while. Noah transferred schools in May. His mom said something about better programs for college prep, but we all knew it was because of that night. I started driving out to Blackwood less and less, but sometimes late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd find myself parked along the old gravel road near Jake's place. I'd sit in the car, engine off, window cracked, listening. The woods never sounded right anymore. Too quiet, like it was holding its breath. In late June, I got a text from Jake. Just a photo. It was blurry, but I knew what it was. The Trapper's Foundation, the one we'd torn open. Then another message. Don't go back. No punctuation, no context. Just that. I never replied. But I did something stupid a few days later. I drove out there again. Daylight this time. I told myself I just wanted to see it in the sun, that maybe it would make things feel smaller, less haunted. I parked by the old, barbed wire gate and started walking. Grass had swallowed the trail, but I remembered the way. I found the stone foundation half covered in vines, still split open from where we'd messed with the floor. And that's when I noticed it. The dirt inside had been dug out. Not animals, tools. Like someone had been trying to get deeper. There were scratch marks in the rock. Long, human-shaped. I backed away slowly, hard in my throat, and turned back toward my car. And I saw him, at the edge of the woods, Ethan. Or something wearing Ethan's shape. It wasn't standing right. Shoulders too far back. Neck slightly tilted like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. I didn't move. I couldn't. Then he raised his hand, but not to wave, just held it out. Still. Like a signal. And from behind the trees, others stepped out. Shadows. 5, maybe 6 of them. All tall, all wrong. Their outlines blurred like heat waves, but they didn't move forward. They just stood there, watching. I ran. Didn't look back. Didn't stop until I was home, locked in my room, phone turned off. That was almost a year ago. Jake's number doesn't work anymore. Ethan dropped out 2 months later. Nobody's seen him since. Sometimes, I still hear static on the radio when I drive near Blackwood. Doesn't matter the station, doesn't matter if the signal's strong. It starts with a low hum, then a voice. Faint, twisted like it's being pulled underwater. You woke us up. I moved to Halifax, thought maybe space would help. But some nights the power flickers at 3:17 just once. Enough to make me freeze mid-breath. Enough to remind me, some things don't stay in the woods. They wait, and they follow. I moved into 126 Blackwater Street on a bracing October afternoon in 2021, hauling a battered U-Haul trailer up the narrow alleyway behind Ashford Hollow's oldest apartment block. The building loomed like a weary giant. Brick facade cracked. In places, windows rattling in their frames whenever the late-season wind whipped through. My heart thudded with a mix of relief and dread. I'd finally escaped the revolving door of cramped sublets and roommates. Now this century-old dive would be mine. Inside, the lobby smelled of damp plaster and stale tobacco. A single bulb swung overhead, casting more shadow than light. I wrestled my boxes up the musty staircase, 3 flights of uneven steps groaning under my weight, until I reached 3B, my new home. The moment I turned the key, the door swung open on rusted hinges, revealing an apartment swallowed in gloom. The walls were papered in a faded, flowered design that peeling strips revealed to be layered over 2 more generations of wallpaper. A tangle of electrical cords snaked along the baseboards, powering a busted window unit air conditioner that rattled like a metal cough whenever the wind kicked up. My view was the brick face of the building across the narrow courtyard, where a single fire escape ladder clanged against the wall. I unpacked quickly, boxes of books, my grandmother's chipped teacups, a second-hand futon, eager to fill the emptiness. Outside, the sky was the same solid slate gray I'd driven under all day, and the air carried the sharp tang of burnt metal from the local foundry. I'd chosen Ashford Hollow for its low rent and proximity to the mill, even if the town's history of industrial decay left a constant haze in the air. That first night, I slept fitfully, waking each time the wind rattled the window panes or the pipes groaned like distant machinery. Just before dawn, I drifted in and out of dreams, of walking through corridors of dripping metal, of half-heard whispers brushing against my ears. The final dream was of a gaunt woman in gray, standing at the end of a hall, her face obscured by shadow. She didn't speak. She only waited. When I woke, the sunrise was weak, no brighter than a moonbeam. I stumbled to the kitchen to make coffee, shaking off the residue of nightmares. I chalked it up to moving stress, unpacking, new neighborhood, boxes piled in every room. I told myself I'd never seen a ghost, and there was no reason to start believing in them now. That afternoon, I ventured down the hall to introduce myself to the neighbors. Apartment 3A was empty, judging by the stacks of mail spilling from the slot. 3C's door was bolted shut. In 3D, an elderly woman answered, eyes bright behind thick glasses. She introduced herself as Mrs. Calder, told me to watch out for the building's quirks, slow heat in winter, occasional leaks, and then, with a half-apologetic glance down the hallway, leaned in and whispered, "You might see her." I laughed, assuming she meant an eccentric tenant. But when I asked who her was, Mrs. Calder's eyes darted away. "Gray lady," she muttered, "down at the end of the hall. Stand still long enough, she'll watch you." She shut the door before I could ask more. My pulse quickened. I stepped into the corridor. The vinyl runner beneath my feet was threadbare, the walls scuffed by hundreds of moving boxes and suitcases. At the far end, where a single flickering fluorescent tube buzzed overhead, I felt a chill. The air seemed to hush itself. I blinked, and in the pool of dim light I thought I saw a shape. A woman in an old-fashioned dress, so pale her outline barely showed against the gray walls. Her shoulders were rigid as if braced against some unseen force, and her face, I couldn't make out features, just the impression of two dark hollows where eyes should be. I blinked again. Nothing. Just an empty hallway, the tube lights sputtering. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I forced myself to walk forward, but the moment I reached where I'd glimpsed her, a gust of wind rattled my apartment door shut, and the corridor plunged into absolute silence. I turned and fled back to 3B, locking the door behind me. In the safety of my apartment, I poured a second cup of coffee, hands trembling, and stared at the wall as the kettle's whistle shrieked. The day stretched on, ordinary in every way, bills paid online, takeout pizza for dinner. Yet I couldn't shake the memory of that gaunt, silent figure. That night, when the wind howled again, I lay awake listening for the soft scrape of her shoes on the hallway's worn runner. And in the brittle half-dark, I understood. However real or imagined she was, the grayscale woman was here to stay, and this old apartment was already beginning to claim me. The grayscale woman had become my nightly grim sentinel, but I never expected to find a child in my car or on any road, much less a ghostly apparition so vivid it felt like someone had slipped into the passenger seat behind me. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after I'd first seen the gray figure at the end of my hallway. I'd just left Marcus's apartment after grabbing a six-pack and checking in on him. The rain was coming, the sky a low slate sheet, and Ashford Hollow's streets were slick with soot and oil. I eased my ancient sedan onto Bleakwood Road. Its single yellow line faded to a whisper. Traffic was non-existent, just the distant growl of the mill and the slosh of my tires through puddles. My mind replayed what Marcus had said. She was in my dreams before Whisper died. I tried to shake off the memory, whistling a tune to keep my nerves in check. Then I saw her, that pale, doll-like face in the rearview mirror. My heart lurched so violently the steering wheel dipped. The girl sat in the back seat, legs dangling, little wet shoes too small to touch the floor mats. Her dress was yellow, moth-eaten and stained, hanging on her like she'd been wearing it for a century. Her hair was bleached so white it almost glowed against the dark interior. She stared straight ahead, chin level, not making a sound. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching. The car fishtailed before coming to a shuddering halt. My breath fogged the windshield. I blinked hard, but she was still there, her head cocked slightly, like a bird listening for the next note. And for a moment her eyes met mine in the mirror, black pools that swallowed every speck of light. I wanted to scream, but fear had glued my voice. My phone slipped from my pocket, to the passenger seat. I fumbled for it, thumb hovering over the flashlight icon. At last, I turned on the beam. The sudden cut of white light revealed an empty back seat. No girl, no yellow dress, no puddles of rainwater. Only my half-drained umbrella lying on the floor. A shiver crawled up my spine. I turned off the flashlight and flicked the mirror down, then back up. Nothing. I twisted in my seat and peered through the rear windshield. The road stretched empty behind me, no child. The only thing in view was the reflection of ash-gray clouds. I threw the car into drive and fled down Bleakwood, headlights painting stripes across dripping trees. My pulse pounded in my ears with each turn of the wheel. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment building on Blackwater Street, then killed the engine and sat in strobing silence. When I opened the door and stepped inside, the air smelled of damp plaster and old smoke, comforting in its mundanity. I slammed the door, locked it, and pressed my back against the wood, knees buckling. I exhaled until my lungs ached, trying to coax myself back to reason. Maybe I'd seen a real child who ducked out of sight when I braked. Maybe the yellow. On my floorboard was some smear of pollen or rust. But then I noticed the scent. Wet earth, like autumn leaves turned to mud after rain. It lingered on the passenger side upholstery. Impossible to explain, given the seat had never left my parking spot. My fingers itched along the vinyl as if searching for hoof prints. That night, sleep refused me. My old bed creaked under every shift of wind. The half-open window rattled like wind chimes in a hurricane. I lay there staring at the ceiling, convinced I'd see the yellow dress drifting through my doorway. Instead, I wrote down every detail in a battered notebook. The girl's posture, the bob of her hair, the exact shade of her shoes. At 3:03 a.m., I heard a giggle so soft it could have been my own racing heartbeat. My head snapped toward the door. There, in the narrow sliver of darkness beyond the threshold, I saw her reflection in the polished brass doorknob. That same ice-white bob, the curve of her cheek. She stood absolutely still, giggling again. 2 notes, high-pitched, like wind, over a broken bottle. I bolted upright as if thrown by a spring. I flicked on the light. The hallway was empty. Silence pressed in so thick I could taste it. I leaned against the doorframe, closing my eyes against the echo of her laughter. In the wash of fluorescent bulb, I realized with a sick twist of certainty, whatever this was, it had found me. And if I thought the grayscale woman was relentless, I hadn't yet seen the persistence of a child who died too young to know how to blink. I first saw her on a Wednesday night, 2 days after the little blonde girl in my back seat. I'd come home dizzy with exhaustion after a double shift at the Yow Mill and barely had energy to haul my boots off when I noticed movement on the landing outside my door. At first I thought it was trash blowing down the hall, but then I saw the silhouette, too sleek, too deliberate to be debris. A black cat sat on the threshold, tail curled neatly around its paws, eyes shining like smudges of stolen emerald. My heart skipped a beat because I recognized those eyes. My friend Marcus's cat, Whisper, had gone up in flames 2 years ago, caught in the house fire that nearly took his life. I'd watched Whisper's terrified meow echo through the smoke before the flames consumed her. I'd never forget how those green eyes had gone dark. I froze, boots halfway off. The cat stared at me, then tilted its head just the way Whisper used to. My throat went dry. "Whisper," I whispered, as if saying her name would coax an answer. The cat didn't move, only blinked slowly. I reached toward the door handle, half expecting her to vanish like a trick of the light. But she remained, pinning me with those glowing eyes. My hand trembled as I turned the knob and stepped back inside. Before I could close the door, the cat padded lightly onto the threshold, then stopped and looked back at me, as if waiting for permission. I snapped the door shut, Through the peephole, I watched until the landing was empty. No cat, no footprints, just the flickering bulb overhead. I exhaled, muscles unclenching. Maybe it had been a stray, I told myself, though I'd never seen one as sleek or as still. That night, I lay in bed listening to the pipes clatter and the wind hammer the windows. At exactly 2:17 a.m., I woke to a mournful meow, so soft it might have been whined through the eaves. My eyes shot open. The sound wasn't from the hallway. It was inside my apartment. I sat up, heart pounding. My room was pitch dark except for a sliver of streetlight slicing across the floor. The meow came, again closer. I fumbled for my phone, but the battery was dead. I clicked on the bedside lamp, dead bulb. All I had was the weak glow of the hallway light leaking under the door. I slipped from the bed and crept to the door. The meowing grew desperate, echoing as if trapped between walls. My fingers shook as I pressed my ear to the wood. Then, I heard, scratching, sharp, rhythmic claws raking across lath and plaster. This can't be happening, I whispered to myself. I backed away and grabbed a screwdriver from the junk drawer in my kitchen. On a hunch, I made my way to the corner where the wall met the baseboard. At that point, the mewing stopped, replaced by slow, deliberate scratching just behind the wallpaper. I pressed the screwdriver blade between the seams and pried. The wallpaper peeled back to reveal soggy plaster, which crumbled under my touch. Behind it, a narrow cavity. I peered in. 2 glinting green eyes stared back at me, wide with panic. The space was barely wide enough to squeeze an arm through, let alone a cat. Yet those eyes belonged to something solid. I braced my foot on the wall and tugged harder. The plaster gave way in shards, and the cat burst forth, skidding across the hardwood floor. It let out a harsh hiss, back-arching, fur bristling. Its claws caught the floorboards with a metallic rasp that set my teeth on edge. I stumbled back as it leapt to its paws and darted out the open door, running down the hall faster than any normal cat. I closed the gap by the elevator and watched, until it disappeared around the corner. I should have been relieved, but instead I stood there trembling. In my mind, I replayed every detail. The cat's sleek form, the way its eyes flared with recognition, the impossible fit behind the wall. The next afternoon, I met Marcus outside the corner deli. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped. Over lukewarm coffee, I told him what happened. His hand shook around the styrofoam cup. I saw her too, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Right before the fire, Whisper stared at me like that, like she knew something I didn't. Then she was gone. I pressed him for more, but all he said was, "Be careful, Danny. There are things you can't explain." That night, I stripped the wallpaper from the entire corner, searching for any sign of where the cat had been hiding. I found nothing but bare lath and a scrap of metallic paint. The air still carried a faint coppery tang, like blood or rusted iron. I knew then that the watchers had multiplied. A woman in gray, a silent girl in yellow, and now a cat whose claws scraped through walls. And none of them wanted me to find peace. I should have stopped drinking when Marcus stumbled into my apartment that night, but I'd convinced myself a bourbon or two would settle my nerves after everything I'd seen. The rain had finally let up, leaving the windows streaked in a half-light that made the room feel hollow and damp. I was perched on the edge of my ratty sofa, nursing a glass of whiskey, when Marcus burst through the door, eyes wild and cheeks flushed. "Danny," he rasped, dropping heavily into the armchair. He kicked off his boots and slumped, head thumping against the back. His breath reeked of cheap liquor and something fouler, fear. I set my glass down and slid onto the couch opposite him. "Marcus, what happened?" I asked, voice low. I could see he'd been drinking more than he'd admitted. His jacket was soaked as if he'd come straight through the rain. He shook his head, hair damp and plastered to his forehead. "You see her too, don't you, the grayscale woman?" He didn't wait for an answer. She was in my dreams, relentless, and Whisper. Before she went up in flames, Whisper looked at me like she was trying to tell me something. A warning. Pulse spiked. "You mean you saw the grayscale woman, then Whisper, your own cat, in your bedroom?" He nodded, chin trembling. "I woke in the smoke. and Whisper was at the foot of my bed, eyes glowing. Then the ceiling collapsed, and I barely got out. He closed his eyes as if reliving the fire. I've been running since. I swallowed hard. Up to that point, I'd chalked my own experiences up to sleep deprivation and stress. But here was Marcus, my friend, frantic, broken by the same apparitions. Why now? I said quietly. Why us? He looked up, eyes rimmed red. I thought I was going crazy. I left Ashford Hollow, moved to my aunt's after the fire. But last week I saw her at her funeral. Gray woman in the back row, her face a black hole. And then I saw you. My skin prickled. Me? He nodded, gulping air. At the gravesite, you were staring at the casket. You looked familiar. It was like she was showing me you were next. The words clicked into place. The hallway whispers, the child in yellow, the cat in the walls. Each had felt like a warning, a progression, an inevitability. I rose and crossed to the window, staring out at the empty courtyard. The only sound was the hum of the broken air conditioner. A sudden giggle made me whip around. It was soft, melodic, chillingly childish. It came from the hallway outside my door. My heart slammed. Marcus jumped up, stumbling toward the living room entrance. The giggle came again, closer this time, echoing against the peeling wallpaper. Then, a deliberate scratch like talons dragging down the wood of my door. We both froze. The noise scratched along the door's surface, slow and measured, until it stopped just beyond earshot. I could hear my own blood pounding in my temples. Marcus whispered, "She's here." I crept forward, every instinct screaming to flee, but I forced myself to stay. The hallway light flickered through the frosted glass panel beside my door. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard nothing, no giggle, no scratches, just a low exhale of breath, as if someone or something was standing right behind the door waiting. I backed away slowly. "We need to get out," I said, voice cracking. Marcus nodded, eyes wide. Together we stumbled toward the window that led to the fire escape. As I fumbled with the latch, another soft giggle floated through the room, wrapping around us like smoke. I glanced back at the door. In the narrow strip of light under the crack, dark voids flickered, two smoldering eyes. Then the blackness receded, and the hallway was empty once more. I yanked open the window and we climbed onto the fire escape, the metal cold beneath our bare hands. Marcus paused, looking back at the apartment as if expecting something to burst out. I heard one more giggle, this time so close I felt it in my bones. And then all was still. We didn't speak until we reached the ground. Rain had started again, washing the street clean in silver streaks. Marcus leaned against a lamppost, trembling. "What now?" he whispered. I took a steadying breath. "Now we survive," I said. "Then we find out why they're here and how to stop them." He nodded once and we set off down Blackwater Street into the gray night, two men haunted by ghosts but determined not to become their next victims. The next 2 days were a haze of adrenaline and fear. Marcus and I moved between my apartment on Blackwater Street and his aunt's spare room on the other side of town, never staying anywhere more than a few hours. We covered windows with sheets, burned sage, even tried a makeshift salt barrier. At my door, nothing stopped the visits. The grayscale woman stood silently in the hallway. The little blonde girl giggled behind me in the kitchen, and at night the black cat's emerald eyes glowed through cracked walls. I couldn't keep running. Late Sunday afternoon, we realized that all three apparitions had appeared at moments of our greatest doubt. The woman when I first questioned my sanity, the girl when I felt most isolated, the cat when I feared for my friend's life. They weren't random, they were guiding us, taunting us to face something buried beneath Ashford Hollow. "We need to go to the mill," Marcus said, voice tight as he slammed a coffee mug into the sink. "That's where all the old stories start. Accidents, fires, unexplained deaths. If there's a pattern, it's there." I nodded. The steel mill had been in decline for decades, but its ruins still stretched across the edge of town. Rusted conveyors, collapsed warehouses, and the long-forgotten furnace that had exploded in '78, killing dozens. We geared up in hoodies and boots and slipped through back alleys until we stood at the mill's chain-link fence, its barbed wire sagging like exhausted sighs. Inside, the afternoon light was dim through shards of broken glass. We moved carefully over heaps of jagged metal and concrete rubble until we found the old control room. Charred desks scattered, scorched dials frozen at the moment of disaster. A half-burned journal lay wedged under a desk leg. Elias Blackwood's handwriting, if I wasn't mistaken, dated October 1987. Blackwood? I whispered, flipping through the pages. Among maintenance logs and furnace readings, a single paragraph was underlined in black ink. They come for the living when the past is restless. The Grey Watcher, the lost child, the familiar of ash, they seek to drag us back into the fire. My skin went cold. The familiar of ash. That's Whisper, I said. Marcus's cat had become something inhuman, an avenger or a guardian. We heard a soft padding behind us and froze. Marcus's hand went to his pocket knife. A thin beam of sunlight slipped through a crack in the wall, illuminating 4 dark shapes against the corridor's far end. The grayscale woman, the little blonde girl, the black cat, and, stalking between them, a 5th figure I'd never seen before. A man in a soot-stained jumpsuit, eyes hollow, fists clenched. He pointed at us, lips moving in a silent command. I stepped forward, heart pounding. "We know what you want," I said, voice echoing on the scorched concrete. "You're angry for all the lives lost here, for the secrets buried." The grayscale woman tilted her head, then raised an arm. Behind her, the little blonde girl giggled once, twice, soft peals that rose like steam. The cat's eyes narrowed. The man in the jumpsuit lifted a hand and traced a line in the air. I felt a pressure in my chest, as if he were dredging up. "My own guilt," Marcus whispered in my ear. "Read the rest of the entry." I flipped pages, another underlined passage. "To honor the dead, we must light the furnace one last time. Let the flames carry their names. Only then will the watchers rest." The original blast had been a byproduct of a safety override gone wrong. But if we manually engaged the furnace controls, we could ignite a controlled burn, symbolic, not destructive, just enough to send a signal to whatever had been wronged. We followed the jumpsuited man's silent guidance through the maze of catwalks until we reached the furnace doors, heavy and pitted with rust. Marcus pried them open with a crowbar. Inside, scrap wood and coal lay scattered. I found the ignition lever and pulled it. A low rumble began, then a ribbon of flame hissed to life, licking the soot-black walls. The heat was fierce, but beneath it I felt something shift. The grayscale woman's form softened, the hollows of her eyes faded to a gentle gray. The little blonde girl stepped closer, her yellow dress brightening, face unscarred. The black cat hopped beside her, tail high, no longer gaunt. The jumpsuited man turned to me, lips moving at last. "Thank you." Then the heat surged, bright and warm, and I realized I'd never felt such comfort inside these walls. The watchers gathered the scattered embers of ash and smoke, coalescing into a single plume that rose straight up the furnace stack and vanished into the sky. When the flames died down, the furnace door swung shut. The figures were gone. The mill stood silent, the only sound the distant rush of the town beyond. Marcus and I exited into the falling dusk. Neither of us spoke until we reached Blackwater Street, where the street lamps flickered back to life. I paused at my door, hand on the knob, and looked down the hallway. No gray figure, no child's giggle, no glinting eyes behind the walls, just the worn runner and peeling wallpaper. I exhaled, relief flooding through me for the first time in weeks. "We did it," I whispered. Inside my apartment, the air smelled of rain-soaked metal and something sweet, like new beginnings. I turned on the lights and sat down at my desk, opening that battered notebook. On the first clean page, I wrote 3 words. "They have rested." And though Ashford Hollow's sky remained a shade of charcoal gray, I finally felt the weight lift, knowing that some ghosts, given the choice, would rather watch over the living than drag them back into the darkness. When my parents told us we were moving to San Mortero, I didn't really care. I was 17, pissed off that I'd have to switch schools right before senior year. The only thing that made it bearable was the house. My dad wouldn't shut up about it. It's a mid-century modern, Liam. Look at that design. Steel beams, floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines. Timeless. He said it like he knew what any of that meant. Truth is, the place was cheap. Dirt cheap for California. That should have been the first red flag. But we didn't ask questions. My mom said it was a motivated seller situation. I didn't know then that motivated usually meant someone was running from something. We pulled up to 17 Holloway Lane on a Thursday afternoon in July. The hills around San Mortero looked like crumpled paper scorched by the sun, and the house sat on a ridge like it had been forgotten up there. It looked cool, I'll admit that. Like something out of a Kubrick film. White concrete, massive windows, flat roof. But the air smelled off. Not like garbage or animals. More like something burned that shouldn't have been. The first time I walked inside, I felt it. Like the whole place was holding its breath. We unpacked fast. Dad wanted to get settled before the moving truck came with the bigger stuff. My little sister Mia, who was only 9, ran from room to room like it was Disneyland. I followed her upstairs, checking out the bedrooms. Mine was at the end of the hall, big window overlooking the backyard, mirror on the closet door. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. Later that night, while we ate pizza on the living room floor, Mia said, "This house is loud." "What do you mean?" Mom asked, brushing cheese off her lap. "It talks," she said, then shrugged and bit into her slice. We all laughed. That weird, polite kind of laugh parents do when their kids say creepy stuff. But I looked at her again. She wasn't joking. She didn't even smile. That first night, I didn't sleep well. Maybe it was the heat. We didn't have the AC hooked up yet, so I lay in bed, sweating, listening to the wind slide over the hills. Around 2:30 in the morning, I sat up, convinced I'd heard someone walking downstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the hardwood floor. I got up, opened my door, and nothing. The hall was quiet, but the mirror on my closet caught my eye. I swear it lagged, like I moved and my reflection took just a beat too long to follow. I stood there staring at it, testing it. Lean left, lean right. It followed, but something felt off. I chalked it up to nerves. New house, old wiring, bad, lighting, whatever. I went back to bed. The next morning, things got weirder. While brushing her teeth, Mia screamed. We rushed to the upstairs bathroom. She pointed at the mirror. 3 words, etched into the glass like fingernails had carved them in. "He is watching." Mom tried scrubbing it off. Didn't work. Dad blamed. Vandals. Said it was probably some punk kid who broke in while the house was empty. But Mia wouldn't go back in that bathroom. Neither would I. The rest of the day passed in a haze. The moving truck came. We filled the house with furniture, and by evening it looked more like a home. But that night I kept the closet mirror covered with a blanket, and as I lay in bed drifting off, I heard something whisper through the vent. Just 3 words, barely audible. "You woke him." After that second night, things didn't get better. They got quieter. But not in a comforting way. It was the kind of silence where your ears feel like they're straining to hear something just out of reach. I started keeping my phone on with some low music playing, just to feel like I wasn't completely alone when I went to bed. Mia was different too. Not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. She used to be the type who'd wake everyone up at 6 a.m. just to eat cereal and watch cartoons. Now she stayed in her room longer, barely touched her food, and she'd draw these weird stick figures on the back of old homework sheets. Always the same. One small figure with long hair, another taller one, just standing behind her. Mom said she was just adjusting. "It's a big move," she told me while folding laundry one night. "She'll be fine once school starts." Except school was still weeks away. On the 3rd night, something happened that finally made my parents pay attention. Around 11 p.m., we were all in the living room watching a movie. Some dumb action thing Dad picked. When we realized we hadn't seen Rusty, our golden retriever, in a while. At first, no one thought much of it. He'd probably wandered off with a sock in his mouth again. But after calling him for a few minutes with no response, things felt off. He usually came bolting the second you said his name. We all split up to look. I checked the backyard. Mom searched the kitchen and pantry. Dad opened all the closets. Mia was the one who found him. I still remember her scream. Not loud, more like sharp and short, like it got caught in her throat. She'd opened the hallway closet near the front door, and there he was. Rusty, huddled in the corner, shaking like a leaf. His eyes were wide, white showing all around, and his fur was soaked and matted with something dark and sticky. Not blood. Exactly. It smelled like burnt plastic. The closet door had been locked. We all swore no one had touched it. Dad said maybe it was a prank Mia pulled, then panicked about. She didn't even answer him. Just stared at Rusty, then looked up at the ceiling like she was listening for something. Mom took the dog to clean him up, but he didn't stop trembling for hours. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't leave Mia's side. That was the last time my parents brushed it all off. The next morning, Dad made a few phone calls. Real estate agents, a guy who did home inspections, even a pet psychic, believe it or not. No one wanted to come out. One guy flat out told him, "Sorry, I don't work Holloway Lane anymore." He hung up before Dad could ask why. That same night, just past 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise. Not loud. A faint crackling like someone crumpling paper. I sat up, looked toward the closet. The blanket I'd hung over the mirror was on the floor, and the mirror had a hairline crack right down the middle, like a fracture running straight through its reflection. I hadn't heard anything break. Then, I swear on my life, I saw my own reflection blink. But I hadn't. It blinked first. 2 days after the mirror cracked, my dad gave up waiting for callbacks and hired a guy off Craigslist, Carlos Mendez. He was a mirror and glass installer who'd serviced a lot of older homes. Not licensed through a company, but at that point, we weren't being picky. He showed up mid-morning in a white van, no logo. Wore a Dodgers cap and looked like he hadn't slept. I remember how he stood outside the front door for a moment, just staring at the house before knocking. Not in a judgmental way, more like hesitation. "You're sure this is the address?" he asked when I let him in. I nodded, then offered to show him the damaged mirror in my room. He followed me in silence, toolbox in hand. Once inside, he crouched down to inspect the crack. I stood off to the side, arms crossed, not saying much. After about 30 seconds, he froze. He reached out to touch the mirror, not the cracked part, but just the lower corner. Then he pulled his hand back quickly like it burned him. "Que demonios," he muttered. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something. I didn't hear anything. Then, he stood up and said, "You know who lived here before you?" I shook my head. Not really. Just that they moved out fast. I think the bank had it for a while. Carlos exhaled through his nose, rubbed his jaw. "Moved out. That's one way of putting it." "What do you mean?" He hesitated again, then looked me straight in the eye. "This house belonged to the Vargas family, I remember. I replaced a window here a few years back. They wouldn't let me go upstairs. Told me the bedrooms were under renovation." That didn't sound strange on its own, but the way he said it, the way his voice dropped just a little, it gave me chills. "Then their daughter went missing," he continued. "Cops said she ran away. Couple months later, the parents died in some freak accident. Gas leak, they said. But everyone around here knew something was off. They were into things." "What kind of things?" Carlos shook his head again. "Stuff you don't talk about. Stuff with mirrors, old world kind of stuff, brujeria, witchcraft." I didn't know what to say. He stared at the mirror again, then packed up his tools without fixing it. "Look, kid, you're young, but listen to me. If this house ever offers you something, don't take it." Then he walked out. Didn't charge us. Didn't say goodbye to my parents. Just left. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of Carlos, but because Mia was talking in her sleep again. I'd started recording her with my phone just to prove to Mom that it wasn't normal. This time, her voice was low. Too low for a kid her age. She kept saying the same phrase. "He's behind the glass. He sees you when you blink." The next morning, I checked the audio. Around the 3-minute mark, the sound cut, just white noise. Then a single whisper, clear as day. "Liam." That was the moment I knew something wasn't just haunting our house, it knew me. By the time I woke up the next morning, my head felt heavy, like something had been weighing on it all night. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And even though it was just a regular Tuesday, the house felt off, oppressively silent. It was like the walls were holding their breath. I got up and made my way down the hallway to Mia's room. The door was slightly cracked open and I could hear her talking again. Only this time, it wasn't sleep talk. "Please, don't hurt me." I froze in place. Her voice was soft but desperate. My first instinct was to knock, but I couldn't move. The silence in the house felt too thick, like it was pressing against me from all sides. Finally, I gathered myself and opened the door. Mia was sitting on her bed, her back to me, staring blankly at the wall. I didn't even know how long she'd been like that. "Mia?" I called softly. She didn't respond. I stepped inside the room, gently nudging the door open. The moment it clicked against the frame, she whipped her head around and looked at me with wide, almost manic eyes. "Mia, what's going on? What are you talking about?" Her lips trembled, and for the first time, I saw fear. Not the kind that kids get when they watch scary movies, but real, raw fear. "He's in the mirrors," she whispered. "He's always watching us. He's gonna take me next." I kneeled beside her bed. "Who, Mia? Who's watching you?" She shook her head violently. "I don't know. I don't know his name, but he's in the mirrors. He told me he'll take me away if I don't help him." My stomach dropped. This wasn't just some weird kid thing. I knew she wasn't making this up. I helped her to her feet and gently led her to the living room. Mom and Dad were sitting at the kitchen table, both looking exhausted. They'd been up late the night before, trying to figure out what was wrong with the house. It was like they were just as stuck as we were. "Mom, Dad," I started, trying to stay calm. "Something's happening to Mia. She's not herself. She's talking about someone in the mirrors." Mia's voice had become more frantic as I spoke. "He's gonna come for you too. He's gonna come for all of us. He wants us all." Mom turned around, concern flashing across her face. But Dad didn't even look up. His hand rested on the newspaper, unmoving, like he couldn't be bothered. "I'll go up and talk to her," Mom said. But as she got up, Mia suddenly bolted past her, running straight to the hallway. "Mia!" I shouted, but she was already moving toward the stairs. I chased after her, my heart pounding. I reached the bottom of the staircase just as Mia disappeared into the attic. "God damn it," I cursed, slamming my fist against the wall. My head was spinning. Mia had never gone up to the attic. Ever. I rushed up the stairs, my feet heavy with dread. The door to the attic was slightly ajar, and the air smelled like dust and something else, something metallic like rust. When I pushed open the door, I froze. Mia was standing in the middle of the attic, surrounded by stacks of old, weathered boxes. Her eyes were wide, fixated on a large, framed mirror that hung on the far wall. It was the same mirror from the hallway, the one with the crack. "Mia, get away from that," I yelled, my voice shaking. But she didn't hear me. Or she did and didn't care. She stepped closer to the mirror, her face blank. Her voice, barely above a whisper, spilled out in the most unnatural way. "He wants me to open it. I have to open it for him." I felt like I was losing her, and I couldn't let that happen. "Mia, listen to me. It's not real. None of this is real." I rushed forward, grabbing her shoulders, trying to pull her back. But the moment I touched her, I felt a coldness, like something was crawling through my veins. It wasn't her anymore. She jerked away from me, her body twisting in ways that made my stomach churn. "The mirror. It's the only way out," she whispered, her voice now eerily distant. I turned to the mirror, my eyes fixed on the crack. My reflection in the glass wasn't mine. It wasn't Mia's either. It was a figure, tall, too tall to be human, with hollowed-out eyes and a gaping mouth. I didn't know what it was, but it was staring straight at me. The whisper returned, clearer now as though it was coming from inside my own mind. He's watching you. He's waiting. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering in my throat. My hand reached for Mia, but she was already walking toward the mirror. Before I could stop her, her fingers brushed the surface of the glass. And that's when the world seemed to freeze. For a split second, everything was silent. Then a sharp crack sounded, and the mirror shattered into thousands of pieces, each shard reflecting fragments of my own terror. I pulled Mia away from the glass, but when I looked at her, it wasn't Mia anymore. She was smiling, but it wasn't her smile. It was the smile of something else, something twisted. I ran. I ran out of the attic, down the stairs, out of the house. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, and I could barely see through the haze of panic clouding my mind. Outside, I collapsed in the yard, gasping for air, my heart slamming against my chest. I could feel it behind me, just on the other side of the glass, watching, waiting. But I didn't have time to think about that. Not then. Mia was still inside. The house felt different now, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I don't know how long I stood there in the yard, my hands trembling at my sides. My heart beat so loud I could hear it in my ears, but I couldn't stop myself from glancing back toward the house. It was the mirror, the damn mirror that was pulling Mia in. I didn't even know what to do. My mind was racing, but it couldn't catch up with the terror clawing at me. My parents hadn't followed me out of the house, probably still sitting at the kitchen table, oblivious to what was happening upstairs. I knew they wouldn't believe me if I told them. Hell, I barely believed it myself. The front door was wide open. I didn't have time to think. Mia was still inside. I jogged toward the door, stopping just short of crossing the threshold. The air in the house felt colder now, thick and stale. It was like walking through a fog, each step a struggle against the weight of something unseen. I could hear the faintest sound of movement upstairs, scraping, shifting, like something dragging across the floor. Mia's soft voice drifted down the stairs. "It's too late to run." "Mia," I shouted, my voice breaking. I couldn't think. I had to get to her before whatever that thing was inside her, or whatever had taken her, finished its work. I made my way up the stairs as quietly as I could. The house seemed to breathe in time with me, the floorboards groaning with each step. As I reached the top of the stairs, I turned toward the attic door. It was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light coming from inside. I didn't knock. I didn't announce myself. I just pushed the door open. Mia was standing in front of the broken mirror. Her body was still, but her eyes, they weren't hers anymore. They were wide and glossy, like glass. She turned to face me, and her lips twisted into a grin, stretching too wide. "I told you. He's here now," she said, her voice hollow and distant. I stepped inside, trying to force my voice to stay steady. "Mia, it's not you. Whatever this is, it's not you." Her head tilted unnaturally, and she took a step forward, but something stopped her. It wasn't her. Whatever was controlling her was trapped in the reflection. I could see it now, clear as day, the thing that had been haunting us. It was trapped in the shattered mirror, a shadow with eyes too hollow to be human. An inhuman grin stretched across its face. It was the thing behind the curse, the thing that had taken Mia and was now trying to drag her into the void of the mirror. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they were made of lead. I couldn't pull myself away from the reflection, from the dark eyes of the thing in the mirror. It was like it was reaching through the shards of glass, clawing its way toward us. But Mia, she wasn't just standing there anymore. She was moving, slowly, toward the glass. Her feet shuffled across the floor as though she was in a trance. I knew I had to act fast or I would lose her forever. "Get away from it, Mia. Please," I screamed, but she didn't listen. She didn't even blink. Her hands reached for the fragments, like she was trying to pull them together again, to rebuild the mirror. Without thinking, I ran forward and grabbed her arm, yanking her away from the shards. She fought me at first, her movements jerky and unnatural, like something else was pulling at her. But I wouldn't let go. "Mia, you have to fight it. You have to come back," I shouted, my voice breaking. I felt tears pricking at the back of my eyes, but I couldn't afford to break down now. Not when she needed me. Her face twisted with an expression that was almost a grimace. But then, just for a second, she blinked. Her eyes refocused, and I saw her again. My sister. The one I knew. "Liam," she whispered, barely audible. Her voice cracked, like she hadn't used it in years. I pulled her to me, holding her tight. "I'm here. It's me, Mia. We're getting out of here." But as I pulled her away from the shattered mirror, the room began to shake. The floor rumbled and the walls groaned as though the house itself was alive. I could hear it now, the whispering louder than ever all around us. It was coming from inside the walls, inside the vents. The thing in the mirror, it wasn't done yet. It was fighting to come through. I didn't know what to do. I thought we had a chance to escape, but the house wasn't letting us go. "Mia, come on." I pulled her toward the door, but the air grew colder with each step. It felt like the house was trying to push us back, to force us into the dark. But I wasn't going to let it. Not without a fight. I shoved open the attic window and pulled Mia through despite the growing noise of the house behind us. The wind hit us like a slap in the face, but it felt real, alive, different from the house. It was freedom. We ran. We ran until I couldn't feel my legs anymore, and only then did I stop. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. I didn't know if the curse was over. I didn't know if we were safe, but I couldn't stay there anymore. The house had taken enough from us. We never went back to 17 Holloway Lane. We left San Mortero a few days later, moved into a tiny apartment on the other side of the city. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened there or what the Vargases were involved in. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the truth isn't something I'm meant to know, but I know one thing for sure. The mirrors aren't gone. They're still out there waiting, and they're still watching. I never thought I'd be left alone in the Werner farmhouse for an entire Christmas break, least of all at 16. My dad, David Werner, works the graveyard shift at Frostwood's power plant, but this year he insisted on covering more weekends. He said the lines go down when the snow piles up and that every extra pair of hands counts. So there I was, packing my textbooks and extraneous Pokemon cards into duffel bags, waving goodbye as his beat-up pickup disappeared down Black Pine Lane's winding curve. Dad bought this place 12 years ago, when I was only 4. Mom had left not long after, taking my baby sister to Boston. Something about a new job, new life, I guess. Ever since then, it's been just us in this hulking farmhouse, surrounded by pines so thick you'd swear they swallowed the sky. The house itself dates back to 1938, Dad said, built by some grizzled logger named Harrison Blake. Locals whispered that Blake's wife died in childbirth and he'd hollowed out the walls to hide her cradle. Other stories claimed a madman once, holed up in the attic, trapping himself in the chimney. Though how he ever got in or out, no one could explain. I grew up with creaks and groans as bedtime lullabies. The front hallway floorboards would shift under my weight in just the right way to sound like footsteps pacing toward the pantry. In the living room, the windows rattled when a stiff breeze swept off Lake Larchmont, like someone tapping on the glass asking to come in. Dad always told me, "Old houses have character, Lucas. They talk to you if you listen." And I've spent half my life listening. By December, Black Pine Lane was typically buried under 3 feet of snow. The old stone walkway Dad laid year before last vanished beneath drifts, and the driveway turned into a rutted track that could swallow even a 4-wheel drive. I learned to ski through shoulder-high banks, but with Dad gone and my sister away, the silence felt like a weight pressing in through every cracked floorboard. That Christmas Eve, I finally gave up trying to decorate the place. The single strand of colored lights I hung around the bay window flickered erratically, and by midnight I'd traded my grandma's fruitcake for a duct-taped power strip. Snow drummed against the roof in steady percussion, and I dozed off to the hum of the old furnace. In my dreams I heard a gravelly whisper, Don't forget me in the cold. I woke tangled in my comforter, heart skipping, but convinced it was just a dream. On December 26th, Dad called at dawn to check on me. I was still half asleep, rambling about how the snowplow hadn't come for the driveway and how the oven died. He laughed that brittle, tired laugh and promised to be home by the 28th. I told him not to worry, that I'd survive on peanut butter and Halloween candy, and we hung up. The next 2 days passed in a blur of schoolwork and shoveling. I'd convinced myself the house was nothing more than old wood and plaster, creaking only under the weight of my imagination. But when I woke on the 28th to find my snow shovel snapped in half at the handle, no footprints around it, I felt that first prickle at the back of my neck. The temperature was hovering at 0, frosting my breath in pale clouds, and the pine woods beyond the windows stood motionless, like sentinels keeping watch. I grabbed a sweater, rubbed my hands together, and headed downstairs for breakfast. The kitchen smelled of stale coffee and burnt toast crumbs from last night's forgotten midnight snack. As I cracked an egg, the power flickered once, twice, and then, click, everything went black. In that instant, I knew this winter break wouldn't be like any other. The lights sputtered out just as I was pouring syrup onto my third pancake. One moment, the kitchen was bright with the soft yellow glow of the hanging fixture. The next, total darkness swallowed the room. My heart slammed against my ribs and I froze mid-pour, the syrup bottle's plastic lip dripping into the sink. Then came the wind, a sudden gust rattling the old window panes and a low, steady thump on the back door. "Dad?" I called, voice cracking. But I knew he wasn't supposed to be home until dawn. I fumbled for my phone on the counter, cursing, under my breath when it buzzed, no service. Of course, we were in the dead zone between Frostwood and the power plant. My breath came out in quick puffs that fogged in the beam of my flashlight app, which I tapped on eagerly. Down the narrow hallway, the living room couch sat boxed in by holiday decorations I'd been too lazy to put away. The hurricane lamp on. The side table threw a small circle of orange light as I clicked it on. The shadows beyond it shifted like living things. I swallowed and stepped forward. Somewhere in the darkness, snow pressed against the windows as the blizzard intensified. I could hear it howling, a wild animal's cry, but it was the footsteps inside the house that felt wrong. They were heavy and deliberate, pads of leather scrubbing against the old floorboards. Crews had replaced most of the flooring years ago, but a few boards in the hallway still creaked in that unmistakable, unnerving way, as if someone was pacing just beyond sight. I froze. "Lucas Werner." A deep, gravelly voice growled from somewhere above me, or maybe behind. The hurricane lamp trembled in my hand. "I know you're here, boy." My throat went dry. I was alone. Dad wouldn't be back for at least 8 hours. I backed up, nearly tripped on the Christmas tree stand propped against the wall. My mind raced. Mom's stories of the hollow man who slipped between walls. Bad dreams I'd chalked up to stress in a lonely house. Now I wasn't so sure. With shaking hands, I ran to the basement door, the one with the rickety lock Dad had warned me never to trust. I'd taped over it with old duct tape after spotting claw marks there last winter. Tonight, the tape was torn, dangling in shreds. I yanked off the rest, threw the door open, and dropped inside, slamming it behind me. The latch held, barely. My teeth chattered as I dialed 911. I kept my voice low, whispering into the phone, "There's someone in my house. I'm in the basement. Please hurry." The operator's calm voice crackled from the receiver, asking for address, phone number, and whether I was each in a safe place. I nodded even though she couldn't see me, pressing my back into the cool concrete wall. My flashlight illuminated rows of old shelving, paint cans, holiday boxes, my dad's ancient toolkits. The comforting smell of sawdust was gone, replaced by damp earth and something acrid like burnt hair. Upstairs, the footsteps paused. I could almost press my ear to the door and hear the slow scrape of something heavy shifting across the floor. Then that voice, low and amused, whispered, "Found you." I nearly dropped the phone. My heart hammered so loud I thought the operator might hear it. the sound of scrabbling claws and a slow, deliberate breathing right on the other side of the door froze me in terror. I was certain the lock would give at any moment. I braced my shoulder against the door, whispering, "Cops are on their way, you sick son of a..." A distant siren cut through the roaring wind. The footsteps retreated, thudding backward with increasing speed until they dissolved above me. I risked a glance through the small window in the door. Nothing but inky blackness and drifting snowflakes outside. Then a crash. The Christmas tree toppled in the living room, lights shattering, followed by the front door creaking open and shut with a slam. I heard my father's truck pull into the driveway, tires crunching on the ice. "Lucas!" he yelled. The basement door rattled beneath my fists as he pounded from above. I screamed, back, and he kicked the lower panel in one blow, yanking me into his arms. The blue and red flash of patrol cars flooded through the broken windows. Officers canvassed the house, flashlights sweeping every corner, radios chattering in clipped tones. They found no footprints in the snow, no pry marks on the door, nothing except those fresh scratches around the basement latch and one enormous, frost-lined handprint on the kitchen counter, its fingers splayed in warning. Dad held me close as the police comforted me. "There's nothing here," one officer finally said, but his eyes were tight, unconvincing. As they packed up and left, I noticed Dad lingering by the kitchen, staring at that handprint. He bent down, tracing the cold ridge of frost. His jaw clenched, and he said in a low voice I'd never heard before, "The old owners, they called it the Hollow, said it lived in winter when the cold got into the walls. It only comes out when the wind howls." That night I lay awake in my bed, every muscle taut. The wind still screamed around the house, rattling every window pane. Before I drifted off, I swear I heard breathing beneath the bed, slow, calm, deliberate. And then right before dawn, a voice so close I froze. "Next storm, I'll stay." The morning after the intrusion felt like the calm before a second storm. My legs trembled as I climbed the rickety stairs to the kitchen, each creak echoing in the empty hallway. Dad hadn't slept. He was sipping black coffee at the table, eyes bloodshot, staring at the frost-crusted handprint on the counter. I tried not to flinch when I saw it again, like a terrible promise etched in ice. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked, sliding onto the chair across from him. He blew out a slow breath. "Not a wink. They cleaned up the print, wiped it with rubbing alcohol before the police left. But I put a fresh slice of wax paper over the spot, just in case." His calm pragmatism was supposed to comfort me, but it only underscored how seriously he'd taken those claw marks on the basement door. He'd tightened the padlock, added a new latch, and rigged 2 deadbolts. Then, without a word, he called in a neighbor, local handyman named Pete, to board up our windows and reinforce the front door with a metal brace. By sunrise, the farmhouse looked more like a fortress than a home. I trudged through icy pellets across the yard to the bus stop, backpack slung over my shoulders. The sky was a pale white smear, and the pines stood motionless, their boughs weighted down with snow. I felt like I was trudging through water, every step slower than the last. My breath billowed in small clouds, and I kept glancing back, half expecting to see footprints trailing from the house to the bus stop. Footsteps that shouldn't exist. School was a blur. Hallways felt brighter than my own kitchen. Voices louder than the howling wind at home. I ate lunch with my friend Mara, who kept peppering me with questions. "You look terrible." "What happened?" she said, poking at my tray. "Got locked in a basement," I deadpanned, but when I mentioned the handprint, her smile vanished. "Dude, that's serious. Did anyone else see it?" "Just me and Dad." I forced a shrug. "Police said it was frost forming weird." She shook her head. "Frost doesn't leave scratches." I caught her gaze, equal parts concern and disbelief. I wanted to tell her about the voice, the scrape of claws, the way the basement walls seemed to breathe. But every time I opened my mouth, it felt ridiculous. After school, I hopped off the bus at the crest of the hill and peered down at the house. Dad had strung a new outdoor light by the porch, its harsh LED flood illuminating the entryway in sterile white. It flipped on the moment I stepped into the driveway, casting deep shadows around the windows. The entire facade felt alien, as though someone had painted the walls with stark light and dark. Inside, the warmth of the furnace hit me like a wave. I tossed my coat on the rack, boots thudding on the mat. The living room lamp flickered when I flipped the switch just once like a nervous eyelid. I frowned and tapped the bulb. It steadied. I told myself it was just a loose connection. Dad was in his workshop, pounding away at a piece of driftwood he'd found by the river. His back was to me, broad shoulders hunched. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A picture from Mara showing frost, patterns on her bedroom window that looked eerily like handprints. I texted her back, "Watch your windows." He set down his mallet and turned. Sawdust hung in the light. "You know," he said, "my last shift got extended. I won't be home until midnight." His voice was even, unreadable. My stomach dropped. I forced a grin. "That's fine. I can handle myself." He nodded once, then added, "Just keep the lights on and the doors locked." He picked up the driftwood again and resumed carving. That night I sat up late in bed with my laptop, scouring news archives for anything about winter creatures or frost intruders. I found stories of Yukon night stalkers and Scandinavian frost spirits, but nothing from Vermont. The house was silent except for the hiss of the baseboard heater. I thought about Dad's words, the thing that lives in winter, that only emerges when the wind howls. At 11:47 p.m., I finally shut the laptop and shut off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. I felt the weight of silence, thick and suffocating. I pulled the quilt tighter, staring at the window. The trees stood, black against a pale glow of moonlit clouds. Then I heard it, a soft scraping, low and deliberate, coming from just under my windowsill. My breath hitched. The scrape came again, slow, patient. I slid toward the bed's edge, heart hammering. The window rattled. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Into the dark. Go away." Behind me on the floorboards near the door, I thought I saw a smear of frost bloom like a pale handprint. And as the wind picked up, rattling every pane, a voice so low I barely recognized it drifted through the wall. "Next storm, I'll stay." That night, I lay in bed long after the wind died down, replaying the rasp of scraping claws under my window. The house was unnaturally still. No hum from the power lines, no distant rumble of Dad's truck rolling home. My phone's clock glowed 1:18 a.m. I texted Dad, "Are you on your way?" No reply. My stomach nodded. After 30 minutes of tossing and turning, I crept out of bed, careful not to disturb the quilt, and padded across the cold hardwood toward the front door. The hallway light flickered weakly, its wiring half exposed behind, a chipped switch plate. I pressed the button. Nothing. Great. No power in the living areas again. At least the kitchen light worked, in part, a bare bulb suspended by blue painter's tape over the sink. It cast a jaundiced pool of light across the floor. I grabbed the largest kitchen knife I could find and returned to the living room. The sofa cushions had been shifted, the throw blanket kicked to one side. My breath frosted in the beam of the flashlight app on my phone. I checked every window, locked, latched, no gaps. The snowdrift outside pressed hard against the glass. 3 feet tall and unbroken, no footprints climbed up, no evidence anyone had tried. The scratches at the basement door nagged at me. I slipped down the stairs to inspect them in the harsher light of the basement lamp. The marks were fresh, deep gouges in the soft pine, as though something with long fingers had clawed at the wood. I pressed my palm to one groove. The wood felt warm, almost damp. Fear coiled in my gut. I slammed the door and engaged both padlocks. I held the knife in one hand and my phone in the other, bracing my shoulder against the cold steel. Upstairs, a thump, faint but deliberate, echoed through the floorboards. I jumped, heart pounding as if I'd sprinted a mile. The sound repeated, heavy footsteps drifting from the kitchen toward the hallway. I swallowed, feeling sweat bead at my temples despite the cold. The footsteps paused outside my bedroom door. I caught my breath, then whispered to the dark, "Stay away." Seconds later, the doorknob rattled. A slow, insistent jangle that sent ice through my veins. I backed away, hand creeping toward the bedside chair to grab my phone and dart for the basement. But the footsteps retreated, padding back down the hall and into the living room. There I heard a low, gravelly chuckle, half smothered by the plaster walls. Then silence. I bolted upright, adrenaline surging. I didn't linger. I ran down the stairs 2 at a time, yanking the basement door open. The staircase smelled of mildew and spilled paint. I slammed into the cold basement floor and yanked both locks shut. My back pressed against the door, the knife tip grazing the floor. I flicked on my phone's flashlight and listened. Nothing, but the gentle drip of condensation from the ceiling. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad at 2:07 a.m., nearly there. "Road's tough." Relief washed through me, quick and hollow. I called 911 again, voice shaking as I told the operator I was hiding in my basement, that someone was in the house, that he was laughing at me. She assured me officers were en route, but with the storm it could be 20 minutes. I pinched my eyes shut. 20 minutes in here felt like 20 years. Then, footsteps above, now closer, more deliberate. A heavy set of boots trudged down the staircase, each step vibrating through the door. I braced my knife arm ready to strike through the crack of the hatch. The intruder's silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs, tall, broad-shouldered, coat dripping melting snow. His face was shadowed beneath a hood. I steadied my grip, breath hitching. He descended a few steps, paused, and spoke. "Boy, you can't hide forever." His voice was thick with frost and malice. My grip tightened. I raised the knife. Before I could lunge, a burst of bright blue lights flooded the basement hatch and a voice thundered, "Frostwood PD, drop the knife." The intruder froze, head cocked like a beast caught in a snare. The basement door rattled as officers forced it open. In the glare of their flashlights, I saw the intruder's coat slip from his shoulders to the floor. There was nothing underneath. No body, no face, just a hollow space draped in fabric. The men charged in. I cried out, "He's not real!" But they only saw empty air and footprints leading back up the stairs that vanished at the top. Dad burst down moments later, eyes wide with relief. I dropped the knife, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them. The officers scoured the basement, nothing but the knife. My shoes splattered with melted snow and the duct-taped floorboards I'd hastily checked. They dusted for prints on the knife, found none. As I sat bundled in a patrol car, drinking a warm blanket from the paramedic, I looked back at the farmhouse's darkened windows. The porch light winked, flickered, then steadied. The wind outside had died, and the world seemed unnaturally silent. I shivered. When Dad sat beside me, he put an arm around my shoulders and whispered, "No footprints outside, no entry points. We're dealing with something old." He hesitated. "And something that doesn't leave a body behind." I stared at the farmhouse, its silhouette etched against the stars. The police were skeptics, but Dad wasn't. He knelt and whispered in my ear, "You remember those stories, Lucas? The Hollow's winter blood? I think it's real. And it's taken notice of you." That night, as they drove me home in the patrol car while Dad followed in his truck, I looked back once more. In my mind's eye, I saw a pale handprint bloom on the frost-lined window. And I knew this intruder wouldn't stop until the wind came for me again. The sun rose miserably gray on December 30th, melting snow into slush that clung to my boots as I trudged back up Black Pine Lane with Dad at my side. We'd spent the night at Mara's house. Her parents insisted on a warm bed and company after the police left us shaking and skeptical. All that remained behind was the boarded windows and a thin sheen of ice on the porch rail where the intruder's breath had fogged. The wood. Dad had spent the drive home staring at the passing pines, brow furrowed. When the patrol car turned off, he reached across the console and squeezed my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Lucas," he said quietly. "I should never have left you here, alone." I nodded, not trusting my voice. We stepped through the front door, the hinges protesting with a low groan. The house felt hollow, as though it had been holding its breath since the night before. I flicked on the kitchen light. No flicker, no cold draft. Dad checked every window latch and door lock again, moving with methodical calm that belied his exhaustion. "Let's get the rest of these boards off," he said, rummaging for tools. "Time to finish this place properly." I helped pry the boards from the living room windows while he unlocked and removed the brace from the front door. Fresh air, cold but alive, washed in. I glanced at the faint outline of a hand-shaped frost stain on the counter. I sprayed it with cleaner. The blurred mark dissolved into nothing. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the whole thing had been some twisted hallucination brought on by loneliness and winter blues. Dad's unshakable presence reassured me. That afternoon, we hauled furniture back into the living room and cleared holiday decorations. The tree, still upright, needles falling, looked forlorn. We wrapped it in its netting and stowed it in the basement storage. Dad hung heavy curtains on the windows to insulate against drafts. I opened the basement door, inspected his new deadbolts, and nodded. Whatever was down there now, it was locked out. Or locked in, I wasn't sure which felt safer. As dusk fell, I made a pot of chili on the stove, the rich scent filling the house. Dad carved a spiral of cheddar into the simmering pot and popped a crusty loaf of bread into the oven. We ate at the kitchen table, steam rising from our bowls. I forced a grin and asked about his shift at the plant. He shrugged, lifting his spoon. Line stayed up. They must have braced better this time. I told him I'd text Mara and arrange to crash at her place for New Year's Eve. He nodded, finishing the last of his chili. "Sounds good," he said. Then he looked at me, eyes soft. "You okay?" I paused. The memory of that hooded shape, the rasping voice, the door rattling behind me, it all felt distant, almost dreamlike. And yet the tremor in my hands when I gripped that knife was very real. "Yeah," I said finally. I'm okay." That night I lay in bed and listened for the old house's creaks. The furnace hummed steadily. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad. "Sleep tight. Tomorrow's a new year." I set it aside and switched off my lamp. In the dark I heard it again. A soft scrape like fingernails drawing across plaster. My heart caught, but the sound faded before it could start properly. I exhaled, shut my eyes, and let sleep come. In the morning, frost glittered on the window panes in delicate fern patterns. A fresh blanket of snow lay undisturbed in the yard. I slid out of bed and hurried to the kitchen, half expecting to see a handprint appear on the glass. But the counter was spotless, the curtains still draped. Dad found me there, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. He handed me a mug of steaming coffee and nodded to the front door. "You want to go out and shovel?" I stepped outside into the pale January light. The wind was calm, the pines silent. I took a deep breath of cold air. It felt good to fill my lungs. Snow crunched under my boots. No unexpected footprints, no signs of intrusion. I grabbed the shovel and smiled at Dad. This time, when I heard the house moan under the wind, it sounded like an old friend stretching its limbs. The frostwood winter still had its bite, but whatever had walked these floors on that final Christmas break had vanished. Perhaps appeased, perhaps moved on. As I shoveled the driveway, Dad joined me at the top of the hill. We worked side by side, and I realized the real warmth came not from lights or locks, but from facing the darkness together. And when the storm clouds parted and the sun broke through, every drift sparkled like a promise. We were safe, and Winter's Hollow had finally closed its door.